What what's going on with you guys? Mm, mm, mm. Mm, 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 mm. Oh, what's going on here?
I'm like, where's my mom? That's the first thing I'm worried about. I'm not even worried about myself. I'm worried about my mom. So me and my brother, we try and get my mom over the gate.
Emergency vehicles pull into the
Kansas City.
memorial here and then turn out and
Crazy.
go down, try to get to Pershing in front.
When something like that happens,
Had the
beyond,
binoculars out, and so he's seen a lot of this activity closer than I have. That's been going on, Zach.
Yeah, you know, Sharon, right now we hear police on the loudspeakers telling people, look, the parade is over. You need to clear the scene. If we could, if there appears to be, well, there's a number of choppers in the air right now, but what we're seeing from here is the crime scene tape is to the west of Union Station, so it's on the west side. So that may be where this all went down, just as you're entering Union Station near Pershing. Where the players were, where the stage is, I'm not seeing any police tape over there. It's just to the west of there, and that's where a lot of police officers are located. And some of those little vehicles carrying those gurneys that Neil mentioned just moments ago, they were stationed over here because, as Sharon mentioned, we heard just a number of ambulances trying to make their way around the memorial to the west side of Union Station, and that's where a number of those ambulances are stationed right now with those smaller vehicles to get people out. But from here, we're not seeing any victims, at least from this vantage point, and maybe they have already been taken to the hospital. But what I am seeing as I look toward the entrance of Union Station there's a good amount of people who are exiting. So you might imagine that those people ran into Union Station, shelter in place, when those shots rang out, and now police are escorting them out.
Funny.
Brad, Carolyn,
Funny.
that's the latest from here.
Zach and Sharon, thank you for
Drew's insanely
your
confidently incorrect posts are just so insane.
Yeah,
He just
no doubt about it. All right, we want to get straight back to KCTV5's Neil Jones. Neil was very near the shooting when gunshots were fired, so we want to go right back to him. He's very near that area right now. Neil?
Well, guys, I'm standing in front of the shooting scene. It happened right over there, to the right of that tree there. You can see a wheelchair. It happened in that area there. Imagine this intersection here being filled with hundreds and hundreds of people walking very calmly away from Union Station when suddenly what appeared to be fireworks ended up being gunfire broke out. They immediately, the police began to run in as people tried to run out. There was screaming. There was crying as people tried to get away, tried to get their families away, and they ended up apprehending someone over there behind that red where the Kansas City Fire Department truck has just stopped. They ended up apprehending somebody. It appeared right there. They subdued somebody. He had been wounded. It looked like maybe two, and they took him out. Don't know if he was wounded or not. They were treating him, but they definitely took somebody out. There were people who said that was a suspect. No guarantee about that, but that's what we were told at the time. That's what I heard several police officers yell to other police officers, is that we have a suspect. They then began treating people. Photographer Greg Melota says a total of 4 people were treated and 2 were given CPR. 2 were given CPR in front of him. So it all happened right here. It was very frightening, with hundreds of people running in all directions trying to get away from this situation.
All right, Neil, thank you. If you are just joining us right now, we want to kind of catch you up to speed to what has been a
So what really happened here?
morning and then
Multiple people shot.
thud. So as soon as the parade or the celebration on the stage ended, people were starting to leave. And then that's when, as our Neil Jones reported, there were shots fired. Some people thought it sounded like fireworks, but it turns out it was shots fired. There have been reports of as many as 4 people who may have needed treatment. Police then immediately ran in and tried to
Was it like some road rage? That's the thing, man. People can just start shooting each other for
reports that 2 people
stupid fights.
were detained, 2 people who were armed who were detained, but
Kansas City, I'm sure a lot of people were probably armed over there.
Spectacular championship parade now has been
Spectacular.
by a shooting in which at least 4 people may have been hurt and are now receiving treatment for their injuries.
Literally within seconds, the scene of a celebration wrapping up, very successful celebration that's been going on for several hours here, downtown Kansas City and on into Union Station, ending in a scene of sheer panic by people running away from that staging area. And people must have been told to go and shelter in place inside Union Station, because we did just get word that Kansas City, Missouri police have released all those people who were inside Union Station. Presumably, we're wondering now if that means the players and their families as well.
Right, exactly. We'll have to follow up on that. But as Neil Jones reported, it was sheer terror for those people who were around that and had witnessed it and heard the gunfire that some people thought was fireworks, but no, not at all. It turned out to be gunfire. As we continue to look at this very heavy police presence right now just outside of Union Station. All right, we want to get right back down there. Bill and Carolina continue to be there live. Guys, take it away.
Yeah, the amount of law enforcement and the response to this is just incredible. Just from my vantage point here on top of the West End at Crown Center, I can see that Grand is completely blocked off by, I mean, I'd say 24 police vehicles. A block over here to Main is completely blocked off with the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. Plus,
What is going on?
I can see that Grand is completely blocked off by, I mean, I'd say 24 police vehicles. A block over here to Maine is completely blocked off with the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, plus all of those charter buses that a lot of the chiefs and their families were going to go home on, we believe, are still there, completely blocking all that. And then further west down on Pershing, there's another 24 police fire vehicles over there, including 2 ambulances not too far from where Neil Jones is located. They do have the back doors open, so hopefully they're being able to treat whoever was injured by this shooting. But again, just an incredible amount of emergency response vehicles still out here on scene, with police tape going from there's the World Champions banner on the back of the stage that has all the sound gear on it, with going all the way over to the edge of the parking lot on the west side of the Union Station parking lot here in front of it. So just an incredibly awful event to happen after such an incredibly happy morning and afternoon.
And just to put it into perspective too, so we're seeing a lot of police presence, which is what we want to see right now after something like this goes down. But from the fountain at Union Station and into Union Station, there is no crowd, like no fans are there anymore. That's kind of where the scene was happening.
Yeah, duh. There's not gonna be fans hanging out in a police in a shooting.
We've still got at least a few ambulances out here.
Come on, man.
Kind of scattered all throughout.
Oh yeah, let's hang out where there's a shooting.
To Union Station.
Oh, dude.
Keep in mind,
We're gonna leave.
And as a reminder, the whole day we were talking about the fans and the families and the kids. Who are you going to want to see today? Patrick Mahomes. So that's the crowd that was here, was a lot of the families, a lot of the kids. And you can see right now live that we are having somebody taken out on a gurney into one of these ambulances too.
Yes, we have definitely clearly a victim on a stretcher here getting taken away in this ambulance now as well. We're not even sure how many victims we're talking about here. According to Neil Jones, he knows of at least 4 victims that they've seen treated, and this very well could be now a 5th. Added to that number.
And I can just tell you, Kansas City police just tweeting this out moments ago. They're now saying multiple people were struck by gunfire.
Someone's being carried.
I'm seeing also on Twitter, I'm not going to report the number, but there are now reports of more than 4 people who were injured. So we cannot confirm that, but Kansas City police now saying there are multiple people who were injured here. So this story keeps getting worse by the moment. Gunfire breaking out right at the end of the championship celebration, and now multiple people have been injured and are being treated.
Specifically, if you were watching this and if you know that area well, this is at the corner there of Kessler and Pershing. As you're looking at the stage, kind of on the southwest corner of that stage seems to be where the shots were fired. And as we've mentioned, only 35 yards or so away from where our Neil Jones was reporting on a joyous occasion. But clearly we're wrapping up Chiefs Super Bowl victory parade in a way that we sure never wanted to, now turning into a scene, a crime scene here that will need plenty of investigating, as it's going to take hours yet for them to figure out what exactly went down here.
Boy, that's right. I think a lot of people are just taking breathing a heavy breath here, a heavy sigh as we watch this unfold. Let's get back out to Shane and Jillian, who are there on the ground. Guys.
Yeah, guys, we're still seeing emergency services coming in. A couple of ambulances, a fire truck just came through here at Kessler and Pershing. And kind of echoing what Carolina was saying earlier, which is it's such a stark contrast between what we saw earlier today, where there were so many smiles, so many people being excited about the day, and just seeing people come out and seeing tears streaming down their faces because of what this event has done and changed the feeling of this day.
Certainly, frantic and chaotic is the best way to describe everything. At this point, as Carolina mentioned, there are not fans sitting and enjoying any type of situation here. Vendors are being asked to leave. We are being pushed back moment by moment as more emergency vehicles
is so dangerous. So again, people trying to leave this area, speaking to some of these families, we actually asked them, they said they didn't want to go on air because they're so shaken up from this situation. So we have families that are traveling from far away that aren't even here in Kansas City, just trying to get home, trying to return to their loved ones as well. But we'll give you more updates again as we start to gather them. We'll toss it back to you guys.
Nathan, thank you so much. Be safe out there, and we just want everyone to get home as quickly as possible from this very, very scary scene. Still, they're all around the entire area of Union Station and to on over to Crown Center and on up really the parade route too. It's time to get everyone out of downtown. We're going to go to Gianni Navarro now for the latest on what you are seeing from where are you right now, Gianni? Right near the corner where it happened, right?
Yeah, Carolyn, unfortunately, near where it happened, I'm on Pershing Road and Kessler Road. We are behind police tape and where all the media is being set up right now. Now, before this, I was actually on the opposite side, but right now you can see a heavy police presence. There is EMS on scene, paramedics, fire here on scene right now. But I was actually on the opposite side on Grand Boulevard because I was covering the parade originally, and I actually made my way over here. While I was making my way over here, I was told I was unsafe, so I made sure that I was in a safe location. I was able to find that. But in the meantime, before I got here, I was talking to a few families, and I was asking them what they experienced. And, you know, some say they heard the pops and the shots, and some others say they didn't, but they just saw everyone running, and it was chaotic, so they just started to follow the crowd and run as well. I spoke to one father and son
Panic at the parade, man.
Station. All of a sudden, they told everyone to shelter, lock the doors, and they were locked into
the crazy part about all of that.
Before they were released. So, but the main theme here is everyone is kind of somber and upset because today was supposed to be a day about celebration, celebrating our Chiefs and their back-to-back victory, and all of a sudden something like this happened. So everyone says they are saddened by what is happening here, but of course everyone I spoke to was safe. This is definitely a tragic event, but I will definitely let you know any more details as soon as I get them, you guys. Carolyn, back to you for now.
All right, thank you, Gianni.
All right, and we should tell you that we're going to get to Scott in just a second, but Kansas City, Missouri police will.
The thing they remember was people running and then chaos.
Of people outside Union Station.
Women in law enforcement. I really want people to know that.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. We are continuing to follow the breaking news out of Kansas City, Missouri, where one person has been killed and several others wounded in a shooting near the Kansas City Chiefs football team's championship Super Bowl parade. At least 10 people were taken to hospitals in the area. Kansas City police say the 2 suspects have been detained and remain in custody. Officials say that was possibly the shooting, that is, related to an argument that turned violent. The shooting, authorities now say, does not appear to be related to terrorism or extremism, at least in terms of motives. I want to bring in now Sam Vinograd. Sam is a CBS News contributor and former Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism, Threat Prevention, and Law Enforcement Policy for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Sam, there is lots to go over here, but your big picture thoughts on what we have seen unfolding. And one thing it bears pointing out, we can now add Super Bowl celebratory parades to the places in America once assumed safe from gun violence that now can no longer be assumed to be safe from gun violence.
Major, I've lost count of how many mass shootings I've responded to, and the lesson is very clear. Nowhere is safe from gun violence at this point, and that's not because law enforcement is not doing everything possible to safeguard the American people. In this case, we look at this parade, over 800 law enforcement personnel from a range of federal entities and otherwise, and still what appears to be a personal dispute turned violent and hurt so many victims.
And let's talk about this kind of event. You know, because of your experience, how Kansas City Police and its cooperative other agencies in the area planned for this. It's an outdoor event. It's the culmination of a parade. It has a central location, but it's not a place where magnetometers can be deployed. You have to assume, and you hope as a planning law enforcement entity, The people are not going to break out their weapons and start shooting one another. But you have to assume that is at least a possibility. Therefore, then you have to intervene and then try to get people safely out. Complex situation.
Complex situation. I will say that law enforcement personnel try to plan for a variety of contingencies, including a dispute that breaks out at a mass entity event like a parade. But unfortunately, there's just too many unknown circumstances that can unfold, like this one. So while law enforcement more than likely tried to prepare for a situation like this, they can't cover every single circumstance that can break out. So, for example, in this case, if a shooting breaks out in a parking garage, you can't account for exactly how people are going to flee, what underlying health conditions people may have as they're trying to escape from violence. And that's where you start seeing more casualties, more psychological trauma, and ultimately more of a catastrophe for the community.
Some basics of this event. A crowd estimated around 1 million. Dignitaries there, the mayor of Kansas City, Quentin Lucas, the governor of Missouri, Mike Parsons, and his wife. All of the Kansas City chiefs.
Parsons and his wife.
All of them escaped safely. But as the mayor said in the first press conference, and I want to let our audience know, 6 o'clock Eastern time, there is scheduled to be another
Panic at the
local authorities in Kansas City. We will, of course, bring that to you live.
Panic at the parade.
The mayor said he had to run, felt in danger.
Kansas City.
Some of those who were covering the event for the NFL Network have put on social media that they...
It'd be funny if people just kind of linked it all to
Lots of people ran pell-mell in various...
the devil worshipping stuff that people were claiming was happening at the Super Bowl. There's sacrifices. Sacrifices at the parade.
The very nature of panic that justifiably ensues when gunshots break out in a crowded area.
Most certainly, and I will say that for a situation like
It's very unfortunate. People dying over arguments. Come on, man.
Based upon proximity to VIP,
We gotta be better than that as people.
Parade itself.
Can't just start blasting people in a parking lot in a parade.
There may have been different security protocols in place for that particular area.
Know that it's not Kansas City writ large, but it happened nonetheless. And I know that when I covered the Obama White House at times like this, and I'm sure you feel it at the Biden White House, there is a sense of powerlessness at moments like this.
Absolutely, and you know, it's something that they've had to respond to too many times over the last 3 years or so. It's part of why they stood up that new Office of Gun Violence Prevention to help communities, not only in the immediate aftermath of one of these shootings, but over the several weeks or months after. And they're more, I think, more focused on assisting places like Uvalde, Texas, or other smaller communities that may have suddenly seen this kind of mass violence occur. Not to diminish at all the importance or the seriousness of what happened in Kansas City today, but to provide resources to places that may not be as prepared for what comes after this kind of violence. So we'll see if we hear anything more from the president or the White House through the rest of tonight or tomorrow. But again, as I said at the beginning, it was the sort of typical White House response, which is we're aware of it, we're monitoring it, we've offered assistance, and we're obviously upset about what transpired.
Ed O'Keefe at the North Lawn of the White House for us. Thanks so much. Sam, I want to go back to you. So, as you know from your experience in government, events like this reshape future events like this. So the next time there's going to be a Super Bowl parade, there's going to be a different approach, right?
Well, we unfortunately use these mass casualty events to inform security planning going forward. What I will say that right now, focus on right now, the federal government is certainly offering support to state and local authorities, but in a moment like this, we often knew that state and local authorities were focused on actively stabilizing the scene and making sure that any injuries were contained. So in the coming hours and the next day, we may hear more specifics from the White House about what resources are being sent at the federal level. We have to keep in mind this shooting just occurred. The state and local authorities are really focused on getting medical support to those impacted and stabilizing the scene. So there's a lot we don't know right now. And as we move through the night, I would imagine we'll hear more from the White House about what they're providing. I work closely with the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. They provide resources all across the country to help make communities more resilient in the aftermath of an attack like this, while the security professionals will carefully examine what vulnerability allowed this contingency to occur so that we try to avoid it happening again.
Sam Vinograd, thank you so very much for all your expertise. And also our thanks to Ed O'Keefe on the North Lawn of the White House. We will have more on the response to the Kansas City shooting when we come back. You're streaming America Decides.
Well, let me start with this.
This really
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response? You want me to just What's keep wrong going? with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
Why? Why?
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued
We are continuing to follow the breaking news out of Kansas City, where one person has been killed in a shooting near the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl victory parade and celebration. I want to go now to Tiffany Null, who was at the parade. She joins us via Zoom. Tiffany, thank you very much for your time. I don't want to impose upon you in any way. I just want you to say what you remember, how it affected you, and give our audience a sense of what you saw, please.
We were just there having a great time. There were a lot of people, like we were shoulder to shoulder. I was standing up.
Should debate. I don't know what we would debate, but I think for me,
at this point, I had heard there were so many different noises going on at that point. You didn't really know what was what, but I heard a pop, and then you just heard screaming, and everybody in front of me just started running, and I started yelling, "What's going on? What's going on?" And a woman yelled, "They're shooting! They're shooting!" And I jumped down. The lady next to me, we just started running, and my husband, we turned around and we left everything, and then we didn't get but maybe about 10-15 feet from our stuff before they started saying, they've got him. And so we stopped and we started, are you sure?
It's wild. I can't even get that. So Destiny has on Marc Lamont. Destiny has on Marc Lamont for a debate. Influential YouTuber Destiny, who does a lot of political content, and likes to overall argue and debate people on various topics, international issues to social issues to economic issues. And for the most part, he's been having debates with people, I think, they're not well spoken or rhetorically able to essentially make a strong point, a strong case for when they talk about Palestine and Israel. So Destiny is a person who's been debating for, I don't know, since what, 2015, maybe 2014. He's been arguing with people on the internet. He's very good at just debating points, debating topics, even when maybe he's not necessarily the most researched or has the greatest amount of understanding when it comes to these topics. But because of his great rhetorical skills and able to recall certain things when he's arguing, and he also understands the point of trying to create logical traps when he's arguing with people. Oftentimes he debates people and they don't come out looking too good. Now, in this debate over here with Marc Lamont, actually, surprisingly enough, well, first of all, Marc Lamont is a person who has been pretty big in this space, especially in the Israel-Palestine space, for maybe a decade now, or maybe even longer. He's wrote a few books. He's even written a book recently talking about the leftists' thought process when it comes to Palestine, leftists and their thought process when it comes to Palestine. And he comes to think about how, and he's been on many networks, many shows, and he's talked about how to, talks about many networks and many shows he's been on where he talks about Palestine and certain other issues too. He's an influential figure. So actually him now just kind of venturing off into the YouTube space, it's actually really cool to see him do that. Now he gets to have more of a personal reaction with people, interactions with people, and speak to them on a normal basis. Destiny has him on, and I think the debate actually goes pretty well. So go ahead and check it out, see how it goes. I've seen parts of it. To me, so far, Mark actually does a really good job, probably better than most of the people he's able to debate with. Also, Destiny does react to people who he argues with. So if there's a reaction he doesn't like, it actually ends up culminating in an argument instead of an actual debate for the sake of truth and knowledge. So that's where we're at with this guy. Go ahead and watch this debate.
This has been the best conversation I've had on this so far, so I'm super grateful for the conversation so far. Thank you so much. Both sides are like locked on these train tracks where it just feels like they just want to keep fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting, and it just seems really hard to break them out. I'll ask you, because I know you've got to go. By the way, the next person you're talking to is my political arch nemesis Hassan, which is very funny. Don't tell him you came from here. What do you think is like the most realistic path forward?
Let's talk about Hassan.
Only can see a one-state solution.
No, he's going to bring up, but Israel turns down all the ceasefire agreements because they don't actually care about the hostages. They're just using an excuse to go to war with Gaza.
This ad, because it's like the Benjamin Netanyahu war cabinet does not give a about the hostages, okay? Beyond using the Israeli prisoners of war and the hostages as a talking point to continue justifying their ethnic cleansing campaign. The hostage family members who have been demanding a ceasefire.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Like, you don't ever go to Hassan's stream to learn anything or to find, like, I'm just going like, what do the progressives think about this thing? Like, I could write the script for this dude's streams.
This whole beginning of this video is an absolute clickbait. Literally, he doesn't talk about Hassan to the very end, and it's fine. It's so weird because Palestine has literally become this issue, this really core issue where antagonistically between Hassan and Destiny, they've actually gone each other pretty hard for some reason, and it's quite hilarious. Because for a long period of time, Hassan has avoided speaking about Destiny. Destiny loves speaking about Hassan. It's been like that since, they were friends, of course, but of course, after the fallout, dude literally just started going at him pretty goddamn hard. And due to Destiny's fan base, it's actually a very toxic environment. If it's not the type of environment you want to be around, which is people essentially going after you, attacking you, they'll take their cues from Destiny, and that's kind of what he does. It's kind of the MO. Everyone who's had like negative interactions with Destiny oftentimes gets brigaded or chased around by his fans. And the funny thing is that he will literally tell you that this doesn't happen, and he tells his own fans to defend him when it comes to this doesn't happen. They don't come after us. They don't go after people. They don't, they don't stand for me, or they don't attack people and stuff like that. But they absolutely do. They absolutely do, and it doesn't really matter the size of the creator too. So it is a little bit disingenuous because he'll often try to bring up the way they moderate the base. But fact of the matter is that if Destiny's behavior is bad and he's doing his thing, then yo, what's good, Jolly? How you doing, bro? It's good to see you, my friend. My friend, I'm gonna be covering this debate over here. I thought it was actually pretty good, so we're gonna check it out. Appreciate you stopping by, my friend. So let's kind of give you a quick recap. I'm just kind of explaining the beginning part of the Destiny's video over here is kind of a clickbait where he kind of just brings up Hassan. Yeah, okay, you've been listening to it for a little bit, so I don't have to recap it too much. But yeah, so with just kind of going back to what I was saying, I've been a part of Destiny's community for not like a part of it in the sense where I'm like interacting with everybody or anything like that, but just basically being an eye on the content and kind of like the relevant topics of conversation that people will have, and pay attention to subjects of conversation. I've seen the growth. I'm talking to obviously like creators, smaller creators to bigger creators to now, of course, just like public figures, right? And the whole Palestine situation has really kind of skyrocketed. It's become such a national and global issue. It's really skyrocketed everything. And obviously the beefs between Destiny and Hassan have actually antagonistically grown so much more now too, where Hassan will actually speak about Destiny just to kind of speak against, I guess, the arguments and stuff that he'll even talk about himself. So I just found it hilarious that the beginning part of this video here,
say anything crazy or reveal.
he's just talking about Hassan, but for the most part, this video has nothing to do with him.
Yeah, this is Marc Lamont Hill. I am a journalist and an academic and a YouTuber on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel. And I'm excited to talk to you, man. I've heard a lot about you.
Well, I don't know what your positions are on anything. I know sometimes people tag me with big accounts and they're like, hey, debate Israel Palestine. And I've been doing a lot of reading for this particular area. So yeah, I've just been talking to a lot of people, generally pro-Palestinian people, sometimes.
Yeah, Mark's a really cool guy, man. He's a really cool guy. I kind of knew of him in the background a bit, but obviously he's blown up, and he's actually been more on social media now. So he's actually blown up from just being on social media. Before that, he was on actual TV. So him actually just being able to interact with people more on the internet has been amazing. It's really, really cool. So I think he's been doing daily content on Palestine Israel, and he has a very good understanding. You'll find out later, of course. You probably already know, but he's a teacher as well. So he's just very eloquent and rationally and logically is able to kind of put together ideas and coherent arguments with facts. And as you'll see when they start talking together, yes, he was canned. He was canned. A lot of guys were unfortunately canned. The media has a very pro-Israel stance. So if you do come out and you start talking about Palestine, you're liable to get canned. They went after like celebrities and all kinds of people when they started to talk about Palestine. So it's a very difficult situation because they people like to make it sound like it's a war, but it's definitely a one-sided conflict here. And you can't even raise your voice and speak about it, or else, boom, you might just lose your job. It's a whole different type of cancel culture that people will have to deal with. Really step on eggshells if they want to show any kind of support for literally civilians, people getting destroyed. It's very savage, but he's a smart guy. He's a sharp guy. He's a very, very sharp guy.
People, but yeah, do you have a particular spot you wanted to start at, or?
No, I mean, it's funny. People have said the same thing to me about you. Like, you two should debate. And I don't know what we would debate, but I think for me, I guess the most interesting place to start is the moment we're in right now, given all of the death and violence and destruction, and kind of making sense of it. Maybe then it'll cause us to take a step back and figure out all the causes and the solutions.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I can get my perspective, and then we can go from there if you want.
Sure, that works for me.
Yeah, I think right now, Israel is in a war with the Gaza Strip. I think Hamas is the stated enemy. I think Israel's goal is to eliminate Hamas. I think they have the moral authority to do so. I think it's totally acceptable that they go to war with this. I think that, unfortunately, there's a high cost right now of civilian casualties. I'm not sure there's any way to avoid that at the moment. I don't think a ceasefire where Hamas remains in power is acceptable. I think broadly, that's kind of my takes on the current conflict right now.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I don't begin from the same place. For starters, I don't begin from the place of saying Israel is ever in a position of moral authority. I don't think that's the case. But more fundamentally, or probably more relevant, certainly more urgently, I don't believe the claim that they are actually fighting Hamas, that they're at war with Hamas. I think the thing that I've been consistently saying is that it's a war on the Palestinian people. It's a war on Gaza. And Hamas becomes ineffective, a compelling, maybe even a persuasive pretext for a set of actions that they've always wanted to do and that they've always sort of done. And finally, Hamas, I think, gave them ample reason and excuse to do so.
So one thing I want to mention is when they were talking about earlier when I was mentioning Destiny's community, I can actually see his chat right here, of course. And you can essentially see the disdain that they have for people that are basically standing for the Palestinian side. During most of this conversation, they're going to be attacking him. And even after this conversation, there's probably going to be many of them attacking them, unless Destiny himself gives his fan base the green light to okay this guy, like he's fine, he's okay. They will go after him. And they're automatically assuming, that in standing for the Palestinian side is already there's a moral negative when the debate's right here happening. And Destiny still has to prove his point, and he has no idea about this guy. Most of these people have no idea about Marc Lamont. As you'll see, a lot of their tone will still shift, even though they've been programmed by Destiny so much so that their original beliefs are, of course, to stand for Israel no matter what.
Well, I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess we can dive into that. I feel like this idea that they're at war with the Palestinian people, what do we mean by that, I guess, more specifically?
That they're a few things. One, when you look at sort of the statements that have been made, which we could take or leave, as they argued in the ICJ, you know, some of that is just anger and emotion and all that stuff. But there have been numerous Israeli statesmen, numerous Israeli former military figures, people in the Knesset, people who range from the middle to the right wing, who have sort of said, hey, we're going to have another Nakba here. People who have said we're going to bomb them 3 generations back. We're going to turn Gaza into tents. That kind of language isn't suggestive of a surgical, you know, targeting of Hamas, or even a reasonably efficient war on Hamas that will inevitably bring civilian casualties, because all wars bring some casualties. That's unavoidable. But it seems to me that they quite clearly know that the tactics that they're deploying are going to lead to a high number of civilian casualties and a relatively low, comparatively, number of Hamas operatives who are killed.
For these two things, if Israel was indeed trying to maximize casualties for Palestinians, why would they give so much warning to try to evac people from, say, northern Gaza before beginning operations there? Why not just like start bombing?
This talking point is one of the biggest talking points that so many Israeli supporters hold. And has to do a lot with the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people themselves. So when you give people warnings to leave, they basically gave a warning for all Palestinians to leave and go to the south. They had 24 hours, which is what was reported, to do so, to move them. So the idea of just like moving a people, there's a greater strategy at hand here. It's not just we want to kill all people. They also, a lot of the people in the upper echelons of the Israeli government have literally made the claim themselves. This is what they've said themselves, that they actually want to create a situation in Israel, in Palestine, as horrible as possible. So they're trying to create a situation where the people are suffering being in Palestine, they're living in war conditions, and the goal is for them to basically leave Gaza, the West Bank, to remove them from Palestine itself. And after this debate, we'll be going over stuff with Rafah, with some of the things that members of the government have said in Israel, that I'm going to show what their actual goal is. And their goal is Greater Israel. Greater Israel is essentially annexed all of Gaza and the West Bank as part of Israel. And even shown Greater Israel to contain parts from Syria, Jordan, Iraq, even Saudi Arabia, countries that are not even part of the conflict, right? So this talking point that Desti makes is one where it's like it's such a devil's advocate, but he ends up giving sway here.
I don't buy that. I don't accept their public narrative that they're always so committed to warning people, and I think there's plenty of counter evidence to that. But then there are also moments where they very explicitly said, we're not going to do that. I'll give you an example. You know, roof knocking has been.
Yeah, the goal isn't to necessarily wipe them out. So people will often say, for example, Dolly, because you're saying goal is to make them miserable and wipe them out. The wiping them out is not necessarily the goal. They don't want to just exterminate the Palestinians. They want to make conditions bad enough where it puts pressure on the neighboring countries, where the neighboring countries will want to take them in, or they will want to leave the land itself willingly and go into the neighboring countries. The neighboring countries understand that accepting Palestinians into their land is essentially fulfilling Israel's goal of the ethnic cleansing, just removing these people from this land, and Israel able to take the land for themselves. Palestinian people themselves know that if they leave the land, their right of return, because this happened to them many times throughout their history, they're not promised the right of return. There's no, number one, most of the houses, I think it's like 50, 60, some over 50% of all the houses in Gaza have been blown to smithereens. So number one, you don't even have a house to go back to. How are you going to figure out whose land is what? You can't even tell which rubble is from which rubble, right? So they're destroyed all the infrastructure. They've corralled and put the people. Most of the Palestinians are now by the southern border, like over 1 million people in a very small space. And the southern border is connected to Egypt. So they're putting pressure, and I'll show after the debate, of course, that they're putting pressure on Egypt to take these people. But at the same time, it's not just like a lot of like, well, it's a genocide. Genocide doesn't even necessarily mean exterminating every single person. It just means killing an exorbitant amount of people in the first place. But the main goal that Israel wants to do is not genocide, just an ethnic cleansing campaign. If they can just move all the Palestinians off the land and have the neighboring states take them, they'll take that. They'll accept that. That's their goal. It's their number one goal.
An Israeli tactic for years, right? You know, where they drop a non-explosive munition, to let people know you got an hour to get out, you got a half hour to get out, you got 10, whatever the time frame is to get out. And they very explicitly said, and I've even interviewed Israeli leaders who have said, hey, roof knocking stopped on October 7th. And there's been a kind of a consistent narrative of, because of what they did to us, we no longer have the same rules of engagement. But then when you look at what people are actually saying on the ground, whether it's in Rafah right now, or if you look 2 or 3 weeks ago when journalists were killed, for example, or other civilians, where they were told that they were on a path that was for journalists, or a path that was a humanitarian corridor or a safe path, they still got hit. There were people, countless reports of people from the north who traveled south and were still hit on the road where they told was safe. So both in word at times, but certainly in practice consistently, it's been pretty hard to make a case that that Israel's been committed to protecting the vulnerable here.
So a couple things. So when you say you don't accept the public narrative that they're always committed to warning people, I mean, Israel pretty unequivocally goes above and beyond when it comes to warning people, more so than I think than has been observed in any other like active military theater, whether it's making phone calls to people, contacting community leaders, putting out notice 24, 48, 72 hours in advance for people to leave. I think Israel has gone above and beyond, say, what any international law requirement would be to warn civilian population to leave northern Gaza. I don't think that's controversial. We can go into examples or arguments relating to that.
There is no other war. This is, another talking point that Israeli sympathizers will often say is that they will give warnings, and you will hear Marc Lamont make the case, of course, but the idea that you have to give warnings if you're fighting in a place that's mostly civilian, you have to do your due responsibility to make sure you're not destroying civilians. But just like Mark said actually a little bit earlier, which is absolutely correct, for the most part, when they were telling people to leave and that they had safe passage to go to a specific place, literally on the path to their safe passage, they were getting blown up or killed or shot. Stories of ambulances, cars, people walking, children getting shot, getting killed. Even the refugee camps, they literally blew up refugee camps and claimed, oh, there was a commander there. With very little, no proof. It ends up that there was nobody there, but he was killing a bunch of civilians. So Israel is like a moral army, and they're doing the best that they can, is quite frankly non-factual. So it's kind of funny, but you'll see Mark here. He kind of destroys him. Actually, Mark really does destroy this thing pretty hard, this debate.
Disagree with that.
Okay. I mean, they do, and I don't think anybody else takes that same level of precaution that they do. We can argue that they might have a higher, that they might have some higher level of precaution they should take because it's so densely populated. But Israel does try really hard to warn people to get them to actually leave. Now, for whatever reason, Hamas has told some of them that they're not allowed to leave or that they can't leave. Hamas did prevent some people from fleeing south. When you say that roof knocking has been a tactic that Israel's used for years, roof knocking, again, that's not something that's required by international law to do that level of warning. They would sometimes, although as the threat increases, the notice that you give the enemy for where you're going to attack probably decreases. So roof knocking, for instance, wouldn't be something you would do if you think it's going to give the enemy combatant time to hide. That's only something you're going to do if you're trying to destroy infrastructure and you don't care if like enemy combatants are leaving. And then people traveling from the north to the south still got hit. Yeah, there's no guarantee that the south is going to be completely free of attacks, just that the north would be far more heavily bombed than the south. So if you move south, the chances of you getting attacked are going to be far lesser than if you go, than if you remain in the north, basically.
Couple points. So you said that Israel goes above and beyond. I want to be clear there. So when you say above and beyond, the question becomes above and beyond what? Initially, you've raised two different comparators there. One is what other countries do, and the second is international law. I would push back. In fact, I would fully disagree with the idea that notifying civilians is not part and parcel of, or is not directly what international law demands. In other words, they're not going to warn civilian population. You have a duty. Let me make it even more clear. You have a duty as a nation to use all available means to prevent civilian deaths. And if you don't, then you're actually in violation of international law. So telling people, hey, we're going to bomb here in 10 minutes or we're going to bomb here in an hour is absolutely what you're supposed to do. That's not a bonus, or that's not above and beyond by any stretch. I would agree that other nations have committed war crimes, that other nations have also not followed this. But you raised an important counterpoint to yourself, which I think you're right about, which is when it's such a densely populated area and people have so few options. You're talking about 5 miles wide, 25 miles, long. People have limited options to evacuate. You're right. There's no guarantee that if you leave one place that you're going to be completely safe. But that wasn't my argument. My argument was they're bombing the very places they told them would be safe shelters. There are people in camps. There are people in hospitals. There are people in other places where they were told, if you go to this place, this will not happen. And they're saying, contrary to what they were told, those very places were bombed prior to the time where they said bombing would begin, or prior to the time where they said that some kind of act of violence would begin. I guess my question, I would go back to the beginning of that and just pose it as a question to you. What is your understanding of what international law requires people to do?
So a couple things. So international law absolutely does not require you to take every single precaution to avoid civilian deaths. That would basically eliminate a country's ability to go to war. None of the Geneva Conventions mandate that you have to take every single precaution. They'll say reasonable precautions. I think it's Article 57.
Yes, that's what I mean. That's what I mean.
Yeah, reasonable precautions. But even in Article 57 of Additional Protocol 1 to the 49 Geneva Conventions, it literally says, I think the quote is, effective advanced warning of attacks which may affect the civilian population unless circumstances do not permit. And there's a whole calculation of proportionality that goes into conducting attacks. And unfortunately, civilian deaths are oftentimes included because that's war. It sucks, and it does. Now, curiously, it is also a part of international law that you have a duty to protect your civilian population when conducting war, which Hamas absolutely does not follow, unequivocally so.
What do you mean?
As in, Hamas doesn't take any precautions to protect their civilian population. They conduct strikes from civilian populations, they operate among civilian populations, they store ammunition and weapons among civilian populations, and they operate out of civilian hospitals. That's a violation of international customary law, at least. Yeah.
So a couple things there. If you're saying Hamas, I would not disagree with you that Hamas does not always take precautions.
They don't take any precautions ever. They don't.
What's the basis of that claim that they take no precautions?
The basis of the claim is, I can try to find those particular articles, but I know Michael Schmidt does a lot of foreign policy analysis, and in parts of the articles that he's written, it's been observed that Hamas has prevented people from fleeing south into southern Gaza as Israel is putting out the warnings. In Amnesty International reports, they've reported that Hamas at times will store, I know for 2014, for instance, I know that it was in this one, that they put out evidence that Hamas would be firing rockets from neighborhoods or from outside schoolyards, or they'd be storing ammunition in civilian buildings. These are all things that somebody's doing that's not taking proper care and precaution to protect their civilian population, because you're turning civilian targets into military targets. Oh, another good example is all those videos that we saw of I think it was the Al-Shifa hospital being used as a base of operations for terrorists to take back hostages or prisoners of war and to operate out of that hospital. Amnesty International also documented them using that same hospital, I think in 2007, 2008, maybe in 2014 again, as like an interrogation center too. Once you do these things, these places lose their civilian protection status. They become military targets under international law.
So there's like four things there that I strongly disagree with.
Sure.
The first thing is just at the level of argumentation. I stipulated at the beginning that I think sometimes Hamas doesn't take sufficient precaution. Your arguments prove the point that I was already making, which is sure, they don't always take sufficient precaution. That's a critique I would have of Hamas.
You agree that that's a violation of at least international custom?
What I was disagreeing with is that they don't take any precaution, and there's just no basis for that, right? To say they don't take any, and the reason, and I'm not trying to quibble or be pedantic here. I'm saying that there's plenty of evidence of Hamas doing the opposite. It's just if you pick to the
And this is probably like the biggest issue with Destiny, is that if you're being charitable, you probably would never say they don't take any precautions whatsoever. But to be quite frank with you, I believe that a lot of his arguments when it comes to Palestine are pretty much heavily biased. And he takes reactionary positions oftentimes to the contrary of what he feels that his opponents will have. So to actually say that somebody takes no precautions whatsoever is pretty asinine, because if that was the case, then there wouldn't be an argument for the deaths of civilians. Like, it would just be like, oh, death of civilians is fine then, actually. But no, of course, that would be crazy. If the killings of civilians were just completely acceptable, then realistically, pro-Palestinians would have nothing to say. Everybody would blame Hamas. Everybody, even the pro-Palestinians would blame Hamas as well. The fact of the matter is that there is enough precautions that they take. Not all the precautions stuff, of course, at times becomes where killing civilians possibly might be justifiable towards Israel. At least international law would recognize that. But at the same time, the problem isn't even necessarily that. The problem is that Israel itself doesn't actually take enough precautions when it kills the civilians itself, understanding that they are fighting a war within civilian densely packed area, which is Gaza, of course. But Israel understands that, and they know that. And the war on Hamas is not even necessarily really a war on Hamas. It's a lot more. I wouldn't want to go too far into that, but I'll let them continue real quick.
If you point to the examples where they do, you could say, well, sure.
Oh, okay. Right? Okay. Could you give me some? I'm curious. Yeah.
I will. But let me circle back for one moment. Well, actually, let me answer so you don't think I'm avoiding it.
Sure.
There's a reasonable expectation again that if people are in a hospital, they're in Al-Shifa, they're in El-Ahli, they're in these places, that they won't be struck. And the fact that there is a Hamas soldier in there or a Hamas affiliated person in this structure doesn't mean that you lose the protected status. It's a pretty high bar you have to meet to lose the protected status, and the burden of proof is on the established nation. So my point is the fact that civilians are encouraged to go to these locations is actually a sign that they won't be struck, is a desire not to be struck. Now, you could make the case, one could make the case that they're deliberately telling civilians to go there because they won't be struck, right? And that's a military tactic rather than, say, a philanthropic one or a generous one. We could debate that one way or the other, but nevertheless, the decision to have them go to those spaces is specifically because there was an expectation based on international law and convention that they wouldn't be struck. You mentioned Al-Shifa Hospital, though. When you look at the evidence of Al-Shifa Hospital, when you actually look at what was presented, the case that they made, not the drawings, not the cartoons, not the animations, but the actual evidence that they showed from Al-Shifa Hospital, there was not sufficient evidence. I saw little evidence to demonstrate that Al-Shifa Hospital was a command center. Could there have been a Hamas soldier underground? Of course there could have been. I'm sure there was, right? But again, you're in the most densely populated place in the world. There are going to be Hamas. There's literally no place from which Hamas could operate that would not have some civilians nearby. And that becomes part of Israel's argument, which again has been unsubstantiated by the international community, by human rights organizations, by the legal community, by the diplomatic community. There's been no persuasive case made that Hamas is fundamentally using human shields. It's a consistently made argument by Israel, but it hasn't actually been made. And if you look at Al-Shifa Hospital, when you look at, for example, the photos they revealed, where you saw some handcuffs, a little bit of weapons, a box of dates, there's all this stuff, but there was no evidence that it was a command center. And the idea that because Hamas is there, we can bomb it is absolutely not true. I agree with you. Hospitals can lose protected status. They absolutely can. But
That's also a really great point that he brings up. And one thing we have to keep in mind is that Israel oftentimes is his own worst enemy. If they actually just were more honest about what they did, of course, they're always trying to control the narrative. But when you actually build a lot of lies to try to control the narrative, you lose credibility. And now Israel's at this point in time where they've lost so much credibility with everything that they've done. It's hard to take them at face value. You really shouldn't. And so you have to look at the third party organizations. So when the third party organizations are saying that these things are not happening, that there's no evidence of these things, that's a very big and clear sign of that, for example, Al-Shifa Hospital was not a command center. There was probably if I remember, it was about like 2 to 3 weeks where Israel was really trying to build the case that Al-Shifa Hospital was some sort of like command structure or a base, or that they were using it, to stash weapons, to do all kinds of things. And it ended up not being true at all. A few weeks later, the damage was already done. They already had blown it up. They made old people inside evacuate. People, left on stretchers, or people I think that died, like incubated babies that they had to like leave behind. All kinds of very nasty stuff happened. And then, wow, look, Al-Shifa Hospital actually wasn't what they claimed it was. The damage was already done, and then boom, time to move on to the next thing. So these are the kinds of things where he's making a point, Mark, here, that Destiny really, if he was being honest, really doesn't have an answer to.
I mean, even like in the last 48 hours, we've seen several hospitals struck. There have been shootings inside of El Amal Hospital and inside of another one in I believe, Khan Yunis. That certainly, there's been no case that they've lost their protected status, and yet people have still been shot inside them, or at least Israeli soldiers have shot inside of them. I don't know. The last report I saw was not necessarily that someone was killed, but they're shooting inside of them, which is a violation of international law. And so this idea that Israel has obeyed international law or been committed to it outside of their own statements is a bit puzzling to me. And the reason why I don't take any nation state on their face. It's not particular to Israel, but Israel has consistently in Protective Edge, in Cast Lead previously. If you just look at the last 3 so-called wars, they have consistently made claims that have never been proven and have often been proven to be not true later on.
So I find that there's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to international law, and I feel like that's where most of these claims come from. So Hamas undeniably uses human shields. I know that Finkelstein puts forth this idea that a human shield is when you commandeer or or you basically forcefully conscript a civilian to pick up a weapon and fight. Under international law, human shielding just means you're co-locating military objects with civilian objects. For us, for international customary law, it'd be Rule 97 on the ICRH website, or the ILH, the International Red Cross Customary Law Database. I think it's Rule 97. Yeah. It's called human shields. Yeah. So co-location of military and civilian objects is human shields. Now you can say that, like, well, it's hard not to use human shields in these areas. That's fine. I mean, there's stronger evidence of sometimes civilians in Gaza will move towards particular Israeli sites that they say they're going to strike. You've also got the fact that Hamas themselves said that they're going to use those hostages or put them in tunnels. So if Israel tries to attack the tunnels, that would be an example of human shielding. Also taking hostages is also contravention of international law. So the other side is already breaking tons of international law. On the Israeli side, again, I have to reiterate, and it sucks, and I know that it sucks, but civilians die in war. Typically, your
Yeah, of course, civilians die in war. No one's making the case that civilians don't die in war, brother. The main issue isn't that the civilians die in war, it's that understanding there are civilians located in these areas. Question really comes down to whether Israel's doing its proper diligence. And that's really the core of the argument right there, whether they're doing the proper diligence or not. Because there's enough indiscriminate killing to indicate that Israel is not doing the proper diligence. There's enough killing of people just walking down the street. Just saw a video earlier today of a little girl. She was walking and they basically sniped her. And then I saw another video of a child boy standing, and they're just standing. They're not doing anything. And he was sniped. And people who try to even go help these children will be targeted too by the snipers. So there seems to be enough evidence. There's plenty of evidence that Israel is not doing their proper diligence as Destiny would have you believe.
Going to prevent a party from either acting with like wanton recklessness or specifically targeting civilians for the sake of killing civilians. Killing civilians in and of itself is not a war crime.
Wonder what's up with the lag here. Let me see.
Killing civilians, even a lot of civilians, to kill a few combatants is also not a war crime. Targeting hospitals that are housing enemy combatants is also not a war crime. Any protection that you might have as a civilian building or a hospital instantly ceases to exist once military objects are being co-located within that location.
And I'm saying that's not true. That's simply not true. So there are a few things that aren't.
Wait. Yeah, which part of that was not true? Be very precise.
The co-location of a military object does not ipso facto disqualify a site as a military site. By that argument, if a single Hamas soldier were to walk into a children's hospital in Gaza, you're saying that we could then bomb the hospital?
No, wait. I didn't say you could bomb the hospital. So the hospital loses. So ordinarily in times of war, you're never supposed to attack a hospital as long as it's a civilian object. Now, once a single military combatant has started to use that hospital, now you're required to engage it as a military target, but you still have to keep in mind the rules of proportionality. Meaning if one soldier goes in there and there's 100,000 dying leukemia children cancer patients, probably you can't destroy that building because
no, but that's the point. That's the point I'm getting at, right? Because a moment ago you said, well, killing an individual's killing a bunch of civilians in order to get one combatant is not a war crime as such, right? That was
correct.
And so in the example that you're giving right now, where that's why I picked up that example and said, okay, so now you have a single Hamas soldier inside of a hospital. I'm saying, first of all, I'm disputing the premise that simply by virtue of that Hamas soldier walking into a hospital, the hospital no longer has protected status. That is absolutely not.
Well, when you say walk into a hospital, what do you mean when you say this? Like, is he taking there as a sick person, or is he walking there as a civilian, or is he going there as an active combatant? Well, because if he goes in as an active combatant, it is now a military target. Yes.
But how do you? So two things. If he walks in as a patient, you absolutely can't shoot him.
Correct, because it's Horror State Combat, I think, is for people that are no longer like active threats. That would include even a ton of military people that are no longer active threats.
Which we saw just 10 days ago, or about 10 days ago. There was someone in a hospital bed who was killed.
Yeah, right? but that's a little bit different. Horror State Combat, I think, implies that you no longer have the ability to participate in military activity. The people.
Yeah, 100%, Jolly. Destiny will play fast and loose with the facts. Essentially, he'll say things hoping you don't know the facts yourself. So he'll say something that's actually true, which is if somebody is of combat, in military combat, and then they decided to go inside like a hospital or something like that, then yeah, of course, you can't go in there and start guns blazing. That becomes a military target, of course. But those are not the situations that will even oftentimes happen here. And as Mark was actually about to go into, just like 10 days ago or so, there was people, I don't know if you saw this, but there were Israeli soldiers dressed up as doctors who went inside of a hospital and went and like basically assassinated 3 people inside the hospital. And one of those people was literally like in a coma. It was like knocked out, right? So he's literally, Destiny over here is making the argument that if they're in combat, that makes the hospital a target. Well, there's literal evidence that Israel will literally go and do that even if they're not in combat, right? So he's definitely playing dumb, but he's not only just playing dumb, he's trying to hope that he's testing Marc's. This is something he does. He'll test Marc's knowledge. So Marc knows what he's talking about. He's correcting him. And you'll see this multiple times throughout this debate where Marc actually knows his stuff. And Destiny will say things hoping the other person doesn't actually know what he's talking about. Yeah, it does sound good. Yeah, if you don't know, it actually sounds like, well, that sounds logical. That sounds correct. But in reality, it's like, no, there's a lot more context to this, and it's a little more nuanced than that. Marc understands, so he corrects him right here.
People that were killed in the hospital were military commanders. They can still operate from a hospital bed.
One person wasn't conscious.
He might not have been, but I think the other 2 were. Yeah.
So let's concede that the other 2 were. How is killing the one who's unconscious not a war crime?
I would have to dig into the specifics of that. I feel like I read something. There's a difference between somebody being under treatment versus just being unconscious. Like if they were unconscious and they woke up and then they were undergoing treatment, then you would say that this person is no longer a military. Like the horror state combat has been met. But if a person's just unconscious and you're like retreating, for instance, you can kill an unconscious soldier. If somebody's unconscious and brought to a hospital, and the assumption is as soon as they wake up, they're going to resume military operations. That person is still a fair target until they're up and then just like in bed receiving treatment or removed from combat operations.
There have been conflicting reports about the person's health, so I won't hang my hat on their specific health condition.
Keep in mind, let me just say this, because for a lot of people, it feels wrong and it feels bad. All 4 Geneva Conventions, which is where a lot of these rules come from, all 4 of these Geneva Conventions required sign-off from every single country in the world. So when you envision, I'm not saying you necessarily, but everybody listen, when you're envisioning international law, what you have to think is, what will countries sign on to that still allows them to conduct warfare while acknowledging that we all need some kind of playbook so that we're not like constantly all like genociding each other or just murdering civilians, with reckless intent, right?
Right.
So being able to conduct war, right? If an enemy commander on the field is knocked unconscious, and then an army is like retreating, the idea that like, well, you can't shoot them, they're retreating, that's not true. You want to be able to rout and destroy an army that's retreating if they haven't explicitly surrendered. Just because a commander is like in bed or, he's knocked out and he's going to wake up and start.
See, this is the main problem with the argument that he's making right now. The main actual issue isn't necessarily that you're actually attacking somebody who may be a military target. The main issue itself is that you had Israeli soldiers dressed up as doctors going into an area that is not a military combat zone. So if you're actually dressing up as a doctor and you're going into an area where there's a bunch of people just treating, for the most part, normal civilians, and you go in there and start committing assassinations, that's 100% a war crime right there, right?
Start committing immediately. You don't want to lose the ability to attack enemy commanders unless he's officially completely removed from command, like decommissioned or whatever. Like, yeah, countries still need to be able to conduct war. It sucks sometimes. Like, there are going to be military targets that are going to have civilians killed. But that's part and parcel of war, which sucks. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think that is a oddly generous reading of international law that seems to be in contradiction with all the spirit and sort of convention of these laws. To be specific, retreating soldiers, people waving a white flag, people in hospitals, people unconscious.
Different things there. So if a soldier is able to surrender to you, now
I'm deliberately naming. I'm not piling these all together. I'm saying these are all.
Because I'm gonna say retreating soldiers are fair game. White flag soldiers shouldn't be fair game. So like when Israel shot the 3 guys coming out where they were waving the white flags, that my understanding is that's not fair game. But yeah,
no, that would absolutely not be fair game. I was naming 4 things that I think are all examples, and I was going to unpack each one of them. I understand you think that one of those one of these things is not like the other. I get you.
Okay.
I'm saying I lump those all together, and I think international law does too. But if we just focus on, and I don't want to get too hemmed up on this hospital bed thing, but I think it's a perfect example. As is, and you'll probably also disagree again, but I think also coming in dressed as a doctor is also a violation of international law, right? Which and this isn't, this is for those that are watching this isn't just a hypothetical. This is literally what happened, right? They come into the hospital dressed as medical personnel, right? People are in the hospital presumably to get treatment, and they're killed, right? Both the pretending to be medical staff as well as the actual killing. I'm saying both are examples of war crimes. But just to take it a step back for a moment, just so we don't get, and we feel free to respond to that. But as we take just to take a step back again, my point is the targeting of the hospital itself as a site of violence, as a site of shelling, as a site of bombing, etc. I'm saying is a war crime, not just because there are casualties, because casualties are going to happen. I think we agree on that. But Israel has the military capacity not to do that.
Not to have any civilian casualties?
No. Not to do indiscriminate bombing. Israel's getting, whether it's carpet bombing, whether it's hitting a whole, the idea that, well, there's these two, we have intelligence that there are two Hamas commanders inside of this hospital. We don't want them to get away. The hospital is no longer a safe zone based on the International Red Cross standard, and so therefore we can attack the hospital. I'm saying even if I conceded that point, the type of bombing and the scale of the bombing is inconsistent with the spirit of preventing civilian deaths. So
to be clear, all Israel has to do is give adequate forewarning. That's the only obligation they have under international law, is to give adequate forewarning, and then to do a proportionality calculation when it comes
what's
to
adequate. What would adequate warning be in a hospital where people are unconscious, or like Al-Shifa where there are premature babies, in a hospital where there are elderly people, and in a machine where there are people who are tied to machines? What would adequate warning be?
I mean, that's going to vary from situation to situation, but
I'm saying in this specific situation.
In this specific situation, has Israel like full on bombed a hospital?
Yes, multiple hospitals. Just even asking that question is just remarkable.
3 months ago, right?
Yeah.
The one he was making all his arguments before earlier.
Let me make a note of that.
Conveniently forgot about that, of course.
Have they bombed any hospitals?
I mean, I would say yes, but again, if our premise is that they haven't committed any international laws, it's not you don't get a free one, right?
Well, so the precautions and attacks are important. This comes under Article 57 of the additional Protocol 1 of the Geneva Convention. Taking precautions are important, but like they don't spell
hella hospitals, exactly.
Happen, right? Like the wordage or the verbiage here is
many hospitals that were also evacuated too.
Are neither civilians nor civilian objects.
It's a crisis over there.
But are military objectives within the meaning of paragraph 2 of Article 52, and that is not prohibited by the revisions to the protocol to attack them. So they have to make sure that it's a military target, meaning there's some military personnel there. And then it says you have to take all feasible precautions in the choice of means and methods of attack with a view to avoiding and in any event to minimizing incidental loss of civilian life, injury to civilians, and damage to civilian objects. All you have to do is like your best. That's really all it says.
Right. I mean, again, I think
I'm just saying that there's nothing that explicitly calls out what you have to do, and Israel goes above and beyond. There is no other fighting force in the world.
What do you mean? What
I'm about to say. No other fighting force in the world does what Israel does when it comes to warning people about imminent attacks. Nobody else in the world does that.
Okay.
Like if you want, you can name one, but nobody else in the world goes to that level to like make phone calls.
So here's an actual very important point. Israel as an occupying force actually not only has a moral responsibility, but a legal responsibility for people that they are occupying to take care of them, their lives, and their well-being, even in a state of war. So even with what Destiny's saying over here, as if that is something that they're doing that's so great, so extra, in reality, this is actually a responsibility of Israel themselves to actually take upon this when they're doing this, especially when they're doing these military operations. So the fact that he keeps saying this is really a big time misnomer, especially seeing as for the most part, whenever warfare is conducted, it's not conducted in civilian zones, right? If we look at Russia and Ukraine, the front line, there's an area where they do battle. They go there, and then the places where they do battle, where when Russia's been pushing up on the border and pushing certain locations and taking areas, those places are entirely evacuated. There are no civilians, so you don't have to go door to door and tell everyone to leave. Russia is about to blow up this village over here or whatever it is. They don't need to do any of that. So this is such a weird argument to say. For the most part, in any war in the world, there is no need to inform the civilians to the same level that Israel does. At the same time, the numbers don't pan out that way either, right? The civilian death rate is insane high. Right? It's over 28,000 dead civilians for the most part, right? So with that being said, even with them doing their due diligence, most of the time these people are still being massacred.
Very telling them that like, hey, like Israel literally has phone teams to call people. Yeah, go ahead.
I disagree with that claim, but my point is the standard in international law is not to compare it to all other people. If I said if all other nations were war criminals, right? You know, and let's say you and let me make it concrete. If you and I agree that 5 hours is enough time to tell people, right? And we found out that every other nation in the world gives you 2 hours. We say, okay, they're all war criminals. And then if Israel does 2.5 hours, they'd still be war criminals, even if they go above and beyond every other nation. So I'm saying it's actually not proper to point to other nations as the comparator, right?
Well, no, but I mean, like as a matter of international customary law, I mean, we kind of do. We look at like how does everybody act? What do we all agree on the rules? And if nobody else is taking the level of precautions that Israel is, it's hard to say that like Israel isn't taking enough precautions, right?
Unless we agree that no nation takes enough precautions, right?
Well, I mean, international customary law basically works by looking collectively at what we all agree to do. So if nobody takes precautions, then international customary law would say that, like, well, I guess we probably don't have to take that many precautions. Nobody seems to be doing it. You wouldn't hold one nation to an exemplary standard, saying.
And I don't think we should. And I don't think we should hold one nation to an exemplary standard. Yeah,
sure. But I'm just saying that, like, do we agree? Does any other nation give the amount of warning that Israel does when it comes to attacking civilian areas? Does any like who?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at and also I would say most nations don't attack.
I'm going to change the quality settings here.
Civilian areas with the same consistency that Israel does. Now, part of that again is.
Well, wait. I'm curious. Who takes that level of precaution?
You know, if you look, for example, at and I'm not defending the United States at all,
sure.
Right?
Don't
but the United States. But I hate defending the United States, but absolutely the United States takes precaution before.
We take precaution, but not that we weren't making phone calls to houses. We dropped a ton of leaflets. Was this for Mosul or Fallujah? We dropped a ton. No, it's not. Sartor? I want to say it was the. There's one of these good one. But like we'll drop leaflets. What?
Yeah, I think you mean Southern. Yeah.
Yeah, it might have been. Yeah, we'll drop a bunch of leaflets, but I'm pretty sure. Oh yeah, the siege of Sadr City. I'm pretty sure after we dropped the leaflets for that, and we gave them. I don't know how many to leave.
Nah, bro, I'm not playing Elite Smash. Is the stream itself lagging? It is.
The first move.
I think I have like too many tabs open.
A couple of days. It was hours.
Is the stream lagging? Let me know.
There was
a false report that it was 24 hours. That was never stated by the Israeli military. Some people ran with that headline.
People on the ground. Again, if Israel says it didn't happen, then we're going to be at an impasse. But people on the ground in northern Gaza talked about getting hit 24 hours later. That's the point I'm making.
It wasn't 24 hours for every single person to evacuate. There might have been some attacks that happened maybe before 24 hours, but again, none of that is a violation of international law. They have a right to strike back if they're at war with Hamas. They have that right to do it. When Israel is providing advance notice, it's to minimize civilian casualties, not to reduce them to zero. There might still be military targets in the south. They might conduct operations in the north before every civilian is evacuated. All they're required to do is give about as much notice as they feel is reasonable, and then from there, they're allowed to begin fighting. Like that's how wars go. And again, I think to reiterate, given the level of preparation for civilian targets, Russia doesn't, even the United States doesn't, Ukraine doesn't, literally nobody.
I think my computer is just lagging a little bit with the amount of tabs I have open.
Where we disagree is on two things. One, I disagree with the amount of notice that you're saying they're giving, and second, even when the notice is given, I'm saying those areas are struck. So in every instance where they were told there was a humanitarian corridor in the south, they were struck. People's cars and buildings were struck going south when they were told to go from the north to the south.
There's nothing illegal about any of that. The idea is, listen, the most active areas are going to be in the north. You need to go south if you want to be somewhat safer, because Hamas doesn't protect the civilian populations. That's the winning issue. Because that doesn't mean that
you can't say they got notice. Then you can't say they got notice. If I say go down Main Street, I say, look, we're going to start bombing here. So everybody take Main Street and take Main Street until you get to the other part of town so that you can be safe. And then I start bombing Main Street. I can't then say, well, I gave you warning, but it's war. So, I can't promise you Main Street won't get bombed.
That's exactly what you could do. Yeah. If you say, listen, I'm going to bomb the north part of the city, go to the south part of the city if you want to be safer, and some people get bombed on the way to the south part of the city, that's part of the military operation.
It's absolutely true what you just said. The way Destiny paints a picture, it seems like no matter what, here's the weird part. The arguments he'll make is that Hamas is the one that's breaking international law. And no matter what Israel can do, it'll never break international law, which is asinine. It's just crazy. This is a very strange way of debating. He literally said that if they give warning and tell a people to go to a certain place, they bomb them on the way to that certain place, that's fine. What? Bro, you're literally making the argument that if they go to a certain place, they're giving warning and they're doing everything that they can. So how can you do everything that you can to prevent, like Israel doing all of this amazing stuff, all this great work to prevent people from getting killed, but people that they're telling them are safe in this area are still dying in those areas that they're telling them to go to? It's crazy. It's absolutely wild. I don't know why, he's stuck ideologically, I think, with Israel more than anything else. That's probably his biggest issue.
You gave him notice.
You only have to give notice with what's reasonable. It's literally written into the Geneva Conventions for whatever reason, unless other circumstances. Under who deems that unreasonable? Again, I ask you, does anybody else give this level of notice?
But what if, argument's sake, Hamas was traveling south with the civilians?
First of all, most nations when these types of bombings are happening.
That's the argument that Israel would say in this situation. But for the most part, they don't really have a lot of evidence to prove that people that they're killing individually or people that they're bombing individually are Hamas. So the proportionality, you would oftentimes say. So you would have to. The thing is that it's on Israel to actually prove that Hamas is there before they do the strike. If they don't take care of that part, then you can't just go in there and start killing civilians and say, well, Hamas was there or whatever it is. You have to prove that Hamas was there. So anytime that they've ever killed civilians, they bombed refugee camps, they've never been able to prove that there are Hamas militants there. In some cases, that they have even said that there were Hamas there actually ended up being lies post hoc. So, but the problem is that if they go to an area and an area is safe, and they said that this area is safe, but people are dying while traveling, that's also the problem too, is there are people dying while just traveling to that location. And these are, for the most part, are civilians. So that's the conundrum that you find yourself in. And I don't know how you can really justify it. You would have to know without like a doubt that you're actually killing Hamas militants before even making that argument in the first place. But the problem is that for a guy who says that most of his arguments are coming from third-party sources, I don't get them from Israel. Well, you're definitely literally parroting Israeli talking points for the most part. And for the most part, the third-party organizations, the ones that are, quote unquote, are not even allowed to be let into the territories to even investigate, right? Israel doesn't even allow these third-party organizations in to even investigate in the first place and to report. right? They're keeping them out, keeping them from the, nobody has eyes on actually what's going on. And he's, for the most part, just making the claims that Israel's making. It's wild. It's absolutely wild.
Are not asking large chunks, in this case, sometimes half of the entire population of the territory to move across the territory in 24 to 72 hours. Right? So we're not comparing apples to apples. If there are 2.5 million people in Gaza, or 2.2 million people in Gaza, and I'm telling 900,000 to 1.2 million to go from the north to the south, and I say you have 72 hours to leave before we start bombing. And then within hours, I'm bombing the very roads that I told them to take. When they have no alternative. I mean, we're looking at it again right now in Rafah. We're looking at people who are being told, look, we're about to start a ground invasion. We're going to start a ground invasion, and so you need to leave. They're 20 kilometers south of where they need to be. They have no means of getting there. All the infrastructure is destroyed, and people are getting hit on the way out.
If people are fleeing south and Hamas combatants are operating within those groups of people fleeing, are they now not able to be targeted by the Israeli military?
So ask the question again.
Let's say that people are moving south and there are combatants that are moving among those people. Are those combatants now free from being targeted by the Israeli military?
So that's a good question, right? The short and simple answer would be, from a legal perspective, no. I don't disagree with that, right?
Okay, that's the whole point, right?
But there's a more complicated answer. I just didn't want to seem like I was avoiding what you're saying.
Yeah.
But the issue again becomes, particularly when you have all available means, right? Because again, you take all reasonable precautions. If I say, well, look, there's a Hamas combatant among these 100,000 people, what technology, what weaponry, what tactic am I deploying to get at those one or two Hamas operatives? Now, if we begin from the premise that hitting one or two Hamas operatives is so sufficiently important and urgent that we can engage in a military tactic or strike that we know will unavoidably cause 20 or not, I'll pick a more practical number, 300 people to die today, which consistently happens, then we have to ask ourselves, is that the only method? And is that target sufficiently worthy of that type of strike? And what we've seen consistently since October 7th is that any Hamas operative, any person who we deem to be an enemy combatant, is worth 100 to 150 Palestinian lives. And so when we see, for example, a bomb drop in a refugee camp, or we see a residential home struck, well, we know there's 8 people in there and maybe one is Hamas connected, maybe, right? Then we're taking a very high risk. And when we look at the fact that most of the people killed are women and children, 2/3 at this point.
Those numbers, well, children is a misnomer because it depends on what we mean by children. Are we talking about
under
17?
18?
Yeah, I don't think that's a valid use of the word children for this particular region.
Why?
Because 15, 16, 17-year-olds can be part of the military and can fight.
Right.
To say that people under the age of 18 aren't children for this particular region is just like wild to me, by the way. It's like a very crazy statement to say. It's like, actually, people under the age of 18 are not children. Once they hit the age of 13, they become barbarian animals that are like you can actually just blow up or kill or whatever it is. Very, very like weird thing to say there.
Which becomes,
and when we say children, we're invoking the idea of like 4, 5, and 6-year-olds being killed. I think these are
I'm evoking the idea of people who are not legal adults. You know, if there were a high school shooting here in the United States, we would certainly say that children were killed. But I think sometimes, sadly, when we talk about the Middle East and the continent of Africa, we often adultify young people, and even in our framing of statistics, we say, well, you can be you're of enemy combatant age at say 14, and so
Yeah, hold on. Wait, no. Okay. When we say children, the reason why we use the word children is because we're evoking a few concepts. We're invoking usually somebody who doesn't have physically the means to fight, and we're usually invoking somebody that isn't participating in any reasonable capacity to fight. That usually when we say children, those are the two things that we mean. When you're talking about a 15, 16, 17-year-old that spent sometimes years training with weapons and is partaking in active military conflict and then gets killed in said conflict, to say that like, wow, they killed a child, that's really not fair. That's a really...
So when a 15-year-old Palestinian is killed, you're saying that's just an adult kill?
I didn't say that that's just an adult kill. I'm just saying just because they're 15 doesn't mean they were a child.
Okay. I'm saying we can stipulate to new definitions of childhood, but I'm saying
we don't have no. It's not about stipulating new definitions. I'm just saying that child cosigns a lot of stuff. There's a lot of associated stuff. Generally, again, it's somebody that's usually helpless. It's somebody that's not taking part in an active military conflict. Usually, somebody who's there's like an assumption of innocence there. But when you've got a 15, 16, 17-year-old child soldier that's been fighting for years, what
percentage of guys and children under 18 are participating in military conflict?
I don't know that.
See, here's the problem. Destiny is literally invoking what he actually feels versus what's actually like legal. When before he would completely try to make the legal argument. Well, if you tell somebody to go over here, but you happen to blow them up on the way there, it's still technically legal. But when these people are legally under the age of 18, they're technically children. They're not children because potentially you can say that maybe one of them are armed or whatever it is. But for the most part, kids under the age of 18 are not armed Hamas fighters. This is like a weird kind of stereotype that's kind of placed on the Palestinians here. You might find some, but for the most part, the people under the age of 18 are oftentimes living pretty normal lives, or they were trying to, at least up until this war happened here.
The exact number of that?
I mean, do you have a rough estimate, or we just get? What I'm saying is, it sounds like we're just assuming that because
I know that we've seen literal videos of children. I know there was the one video that we literally saw of a child standing on top of a truck with a sling, slinging a rock at an Israeli soldier, then gets shot, and there's immediately a camera crew and a medical personnel standing right behind them. By the way, that would be a war crime.
Imagine saying a child with the sling is a Hamas fighter. Kids used to literally sit there for like decades and like throw rocks at IDF soldiers as they used to come in, especially in the West Bank, and when they would protest also the Israeli government, they would throw rocks and stuff like that, and they would actually get shot back oftentimes and killed or detained or taken away and thrown into these military prisons where they would be in there for a decade or more, and have like horrible events placed on them, oftentimes torture and all kinds of like very crazy stuff would happen to them there. But a child with a sling is somehow associated with like Hamas to Destiny's. It's just, I don't know. It's so wild. To me, this belies the kind of like bias that he has towards these group of people, feelings that he has towards them. It's a more emotional thing, not necessarily even like a logical thing. It's kind of where I feel like a lot of this, he pulls from a lot of these things from. Of course, he's going to make the arguments for him as much as he can, like logically try to make the arguments for a lot of these things, which he should, because that's what you're supposed to do, of course. But at the same time, you know, for me, it always felt like his bias, when he went into it very biased, and he was always working backwards from that bias to justify why he felt the way he felt about the situation in the Middle East and so on and so forth.
In order to basically cure him immediately while getting all of it on footage to show that children are being attacked by the IDF, which is like the propaganda lines that are...
in the exact example you're giving, you're saying that wouldn't be... because that child slung a rock, you're saying that means they're a combatant and therefore a child wasn't killed based on the concepts that childhood invokes that you just raised? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, of course. Obviously, yeah. So, when we talk about school children being killed, right? Like when you talk about Columbine, we don't usually refer to the shooters as like the children killed other children. You say the shooters or the mass murderers killed the children because it feels weird to say the children killed the children, because child carries with it again these assumptions of innocence and non-combatant, non-militant activity. Nobody would refer to a 15, 16, 17-year-old that's had weapons training for years carrying an AK-47.
Also notice that he mentioned Columbine, when Columbine was a college, and everybody in the college for the most part are over the age of 18. So technically they wouldn't be children. So you wouldn't call people in Columbine children, they're adults. Like he's talking about people under the age of 18 should be basically taken as adults. Oftentimes, and I'm pretty sure this is also what bothered Mark, is this is the type of like language that people would often use. Black people would feel this way when they would talk about kids. Like, you know, if like a young black person did like something violent or whatever it is, and then they want to treat that person who's under the age of 18 as if they're over the age of 18. That's kind of the feelings that it evokes when you speak about them in this way. Let me make sure I put that into the right place real quick.
Based on that definition, everybody's a combatant. And part of how we're Israel frames.
I don't think Israel is framing every male dead person as a.
I'm not saying they are. I'm not saying they are. I'm beginning by pointing out, using another example, sort of the danger of assigning combatant status to people by virtue of age, right? In the case of Israel, what they're doing, and even what you're doing right now, is saying, well, there are large numbers of Hamas people there, right? In this room, in this refugee camp, in this house, right? And part of how Israel defines, and this is part of how Israel justifies saying they're getting at combatants and not civilians, is to, one, loosely define a Hamas connection. When you look at, when they say someone has a Hamas connection, or these journalists that were killed weren't real journalists, they were Hamas soldiers, and then you look at how they're defined as being part of Hamas, it's often like, well, they work for state TV, they have a cousin who they met with, here's a picture of them 5 years ago at a Hamas meeting or wearing a uniform or something of that sort, right? And so we create this broad and loose definition of what it means to be Hamas. And so even if someone is not involved in an act of combat, we still say, well, they may not be a civilian. And the only people we seem to be conceding are civilians all the time are the people who you're narrowly talking about, right? In your example, right, which are the housewives and the 5-year-old, right? But when we look at the number of people who have been killed here, you know, a disproportionate number of them being
7,000, yeah.
28 now, yeah. It's and 2/3 of them being women and children. Now we're saying, well, they're not children. You know, they're Hamas children. You know, they're 14-year-old combatants. They're people on trucks throwing rocks who also shouldn't be killed by snipers.
Do you? This is like we don't have to spend too much longer on this particular topic. Do you know Cat Williams?
I'll be right back.
Do you followed his kind of downfall when he got, you know, quote unquote, beat up by the high schooler, right?
I saw the video, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's kind of what I'm talking about, right? When I heard that initially, now listen, as a 5'8", okay, short king, all right, I sympathize with Cat Williams as a fellow short man. When I heard that story, that sounded really funny. How do you get beat up by a high schooler? You said you saw that video though, right? That dude was huge compared to Cat. It's not surprising that he beat the shit out of him. I don't know what Cat, I think Cat even swung first. I was like, bro, you're wild. Oh wait, was that that kid in middle school? I'm just saying that, like, I thought it was a high school kid, but I'm just saying that, like, when we say women and children, when we say children are being killed, we're invoking this weird idea that it's like these innocent non-combatants that are dying. I think your combatant status comes first, and then after that, we evaluate things like women and children. Like we said before, if a group of 17-year-old boys were, you know, going into some place with AK-47s to shoot it up, and they, you know, they get killed in an operation, we would be like, oh my God, you killed children. They were soldiers first. They were militants first. Same thing when the IDF employs women. We don't say, wow, Hamas is horrible for killing those women soldiers. You know, now if it's civilians, it's another thing. But I think your militant status, your military status, your combat status comes first in these evaluations, unless we're like an exceptional territory. We're talking like 6 or 7 or 8-year-olds or something like that. But once
if an 8-year-old were walking down the street with an AK-47 in any country in the world,
if a what?
I would have. If an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old were walking down the street with an AK-47, if a 4-year-old were walking down the street with an AK-47 and somehow had the physical capacity to wipe out a room, I would expect people to defend themselves as reasonable. I expect them to go use all reasonable precautions to prevent it, but if not, they'd have to defend themselves. I ain't got no problem with that. My issue is not that. My issue is that the framing of combatant status and the framing of eligibility for that category is very loose and broad when we talk about people, particularly often in the Middle East.
Sure.
And that's my point. So no, I agree. If a group of 17-year-olds got AK-47s, I'm not saying check their ID first.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. I think we largely agree that. But like when Hamas is taking every opportunity to fight among civilians, to disguise themselves among civilians, and to operate and store ammunition and command from civilians, like, yeah.
This whole argument is so stupid because at the end of the day, for the most part, when they talk about the civilians inside of that are dying inside of Gaza, most of those are just civilians. They're not, even Israel doesn't make the claim that those civilians are old child warriors raised by Hamas ready to fight jihad against Israel. No one even makes that claim to begin with. So even just being so pedantic, just to even try to like argue the point that calling children, people under the age of 18, children that are dying as a result of the war, not even part of the war, dying as some kind of, like, for example, like the children in the incubators that died, babies. There's so many children, like actual children under the age of like 7 or 8 or 10 that die. So this whole argument is so silly. It doesn't even make sense. He's always trying to constantly like reframe the argument and the narrative in a way where it removes responsibility from Israel, which like I said, it's his biases.
These calculations on Israel's side get way, 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 way harder. And when the argument is given over and over again that they've killed, 40% of the people killed are children, or 58% or 60% are women and children. Like the impression given is just that, like, wow, they're just indiscriminately carpet bombing. I think you even used the term carpet bombing these cities to kill people. And it's like, okay, well, how is Israel carpet bombing Gaza, one of the more densely populated areas on the planet? And, after however many 20, 30, or no, what was it, like 10,000 bombs or whatever, they've only killed so many people. If they were indiscriminately bombing, why is it that 20 to 30%, at least what Israel claims, the dead are Hamas militants? How is that number, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, when it's like some of the most densely populated areas ever? Wouldn't we expect to see civilian deaths be like 10 to 1, 20 to 1, 30 to 1? What other urban combat would we compare to this where we'd go like, wow, they did it way better here than they're doing it right now in Israel? I feel like all the numbers, all the reporting, everything lines up that they're trying to be about as precise as possible, but you're fighting an enemy that literally, like, willingly and openly uses the civilian populations to fight amongst.
What would it look like in a place like Gaza to not use a civilian population?
What would it look like in Gaza?
Not use a civilian, yeah.
I don't know.
For
There's
Hamas
tons
to
of
fight
like,
without.
there's lots of like kind of rurally area. I think there's like 3 or 4 big cities in Gaza, but like we can bring up a map and look at it. Like there are areas outside of the heavy urban areas that you could operate out of, but the reason why they don't is because the IDF would wipe them out immediately. So
yes, yes.
Yeah. So, but you're laughing, but that's the justification for using human shields. That's not a justification in international law. You can't say like I'm using human shields.
No. I'm not saying they're using human shields. What I'm saying is I'm saying that it is a dense area. I'm saying that it is incredibly difficult to fight in a dense area without being very close to people.
I agree with what you're saying.
No, I know. But just hear this. The part where we're disagreeing is two things. One, I'm saying that rather than conceiving of Hamas often using human shields, I'm suggesting that they're occupying that Israel. I'm looking at it from the opposite side and saying Israel is using the pretext of Hamas is everywhere, and even lumping other non-Hamas folk into that Hamas pile as a pretext for being fairly indiscriminate in the bombing. Because when I bomb when I blow up the mosque, like happened 2 days ago, when you bomb the mosque, you can say, well, yeah, but there's so much Hamas in the area.
So much Hamas in the air. They're everywhere.
The ability to be more surgical, the ability to be more precise. I mean, Hamas doesn't have the military capacity to be discriminate. Excuse me. When they fire their rockets across, they don't actually have the ability to be indiscriminate. That's not to defend it. It's a war crime. Again, I begin from the place of saying Hamas has committed lots of war crimes. I'm never saying they don't. You know what I mean? But my concern is that what Israel has decided to do is to retaliate, often using similar means but to a much more dangerous and broad scale, under the pretext of, well, Hamas is hiding everywhere. And when they're asked to present evidence of this, evidence that there is an Al-Shifa hospital command center, the only tunnels and command center we saw was the one that Israel created.
Well, hold on. So firstly, yeah, we did see that massive tunnel, and we saw Hamas additions to those tunnels that were underneath Al-Shifa, because there was a bunker built there, I think 20 years ago, originally, when the settlements were there. But there were additions to that tunnel, and there was new wiring ran that was shown. There were weapons that were located within that hospital. We saw them stored next to MRI machines and everything else, right? That's enough to remove the civilian protection of the hospital.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. It's being used for combat.
So you're saying any weapons in that hospital then makes it no longer a hospital?
I mean, not just throwing a weapon there, but combat operations from within, yeah. And
but there was no evidence. I'm saying there was no evidence.
We literally saw video footage on October 7th of hostages being taken back to that exact hospital. And Amnesty International has been reporting for 10 years that that hospital has like an interrogation wing where people
claims that they were actually making was that a lot of the hostages that were taken on October 7th actually needed medical attention. So they had to take them to the hospital to get looked at before they kept them for hostage exchange. So that in itself doesn't just make the hospital itself a military target to go and blow people up. There was so much like information that was coming out from like Israel to try to justify Shifa as like a military target, but it all became discredited afterwards. And where I believe even like the New York Times or the New York Post literally said that there's no validity to the claims that Israel was making. Which, by the way, like, the mainstream media is saying that, and you already know which side they hold water for. It tells you a lot, man.
people are taken and tortured there for suspected collaborators and stuff. So it's literally, it is used.
Amnesty International has never confirmed that El Shifa Hospital was a Hamas command center during the time that it was bombed.
That's true, but they have, but they said in the past that it is. There's no reason to assume
that doesn't meet the legal standard. That's what I'm saying.
I understand. I'm just saying that in the past we know that it has been, and on October 7th,
Destiny's getting cooked.
Video footage of hostages being taken past like 5 or 6 other hospitals to go to Al Shifa Hospital. We saw them walk in with the hospital on the CCTV into that hospital. So it seems to be the case that they're probably still using it, and we know that the tunnels underneath have new tunnels dug because there's new wiring, and we saw weapons within the hospital. That's a lot of circumstantial evidence that kind of points to the fact that it's probably still being used by Hamas in a military combat operation.
One, that circumstantial evidence can be compelling if there's enough of it. I'm not saying we need a smoking gun, but much of what you're talking about does not amount to, in fact, none of what you talked about amounts to the idea that there was a Hamas command center there.
Wait, why do you keep saying there doesn't have to be a command center for it to be a military?
Because that was their claim. That was literally their claim.
Sure, that might have been their claim. They might have been wrong, but it was used as a military objective, 100%.
But it's not like they just were being hyperbolic. The whole point is that they were making a claim that was on its face untrue, and then attempted to support that claim by piecing together random evidence that actually wasn't the case. I'm saying there's reason to trust the claim in the first place.
I would have to look back and see what all the I know I saw as it was being released, the videos and everything, and then the new tunnels underneath. I don't know if anything else. It might have been the fact that it wasn't a command and control center. It might not have been. It might not have been that, but it was still clearly used as a military objective. So, I mean, like nothing that they did here. It's not like they didn't bomb that hospital, right? They just stormed it and they took it over like that.
Wiring. So you're saying that wiring and some weapons makes it a sufficient target?
Yeah. It's a military target, yeah. It's being used for military purposes. And again, remember the video footage on the day of the hostages being taken in there by Hamas. They're literally using it as a military outpost. Yes.
Yeah, no, we disagree. I need to see that footage. Nothing I've seen, and I've never seen any independent international body, any independent journalistic body, any independent diplomatic body make the case that Israel has demonstrated that Al Shifa was a military target. And honestly, when pressed on this, the most common response by the Israeli spokespeople is almost like, including the leader of the Mossad who I spoke to, former leader of the Mossad who I spoke to a few days ago, who basically said, well, after October 7th, all bets are off. I mean, that their argument has been more when pressed for evidence, not to provide the evidence, but to say, well, did you see what happened on October 7th? You know, they don't play by the rules. We can't play by the rules, which is to me a very different case than saying, look, here's a persuasive body of evidence. They promised the evidence on Al Shifa Hospital. I have yet to see it. They've promised this evidence, and I guess the other thing I
guess you're really hung up on this command and conquer thing, or not command and conquer, the C2, the command
only
and control.
because they made that as the
They
argument.
might have made that argument. I don't know if they found it justified as being command and control. It is undeniably just the footage alone of the hostages being. But you haven't seen that CCTV footage of the hostages being taken to Al Shifa Hospital.
If hostages are taken into Al Shifa Hospital,
yeah,
and then relocated, that does not then mean that you can bomb the hospital.
I don't think they bombed that hospital. They was
or shoot up the hospital.
I don't think they shut up the hospital. I think they just sieged it and then they moved in. I don't think they blew up the hospital or were like artillery shelling, destroying the.
Okay.
Yeah.
They blew up the parking lot, or the parking lot was blown up, and then all of the people within the hospital were evacuated and they were made to move. And then they basically destroyed the hospital trying to look for tunnels. For all intents and purposes, it was destroyed. You know, they didn't have to go in there and blow it with an actual bomb itself. There were other hospitals that were blown up. But for this, they actually made everybody leave. And I think before the parking lot was blown up, there were a lot of people there just hanging out there as like refugees, kind of as like a safe zone, trying to be in an area where near the the hospital where they thought it was going to be safe. And then they were all told to leave, and then they all got kicked out. And obviously you have people there that need medical attention. You can't just relocate them. It's not very easy to be relocated in the first place. So just a weird argument. And then trying to say like all these hostages were taken in there. The claim was that the hostages were taken in there to seek medical attention because of the events that happened on October 7th. They were in the best of health, some of these people that were taken. And then they were obviously relocated. They're not just going to hang out there, or they got some like mysterious tunnels where they're just going to hang out underneath the hospital. There was no evidence of that.
We're going to disagree on that, right? But we can. This is provable stuff. But so we can just look it up.
Sure.
But I guess my bigger question for you on this point, but also to the bigger question: why do you trust the Israeli government's claims so much? Because much of your arguments rest on the Israeli government telling the truth when they consistently have not.
So I think that the Israeli government has every incentive to lie. I don't think we should just believe what they say. So I think what you look at is you try to look at other parties that will verify things. I tend to trust the United States here. And you'll look at what international human rights people are saying, and then you'll look at other journalists that are being allowed to look at stuff and then what they're saying. And then we kind of like look at the numbers, and then we see basically what's going on. So for instance, let's say that it was the case that like 3 hospitals get JDAM'd, get bombed, completely obliterated. And you're looking at the news, you're like, okay. And then let's say that the Gazan Health Ministry reports 5,000 dead between the 3 hospitals. That's a pretty huge thing, okay? You're bombing hospitals directly. You've got 5,000 reported civilian deaths. At that point, I'd be like, I need to see some really strong evidence that there were civilians here. And it's not enough for Israel to just say, well, hey, look, we believe there was stuff. I think the videos that they've been releasing, I think the other journalists that they let come in to look at the October 7th stuff, the stuff that they published about it, I think that the ICG... Like who, what? So, and in response to the October 7th stuff, there were tons of international journalists. Israel made, I think they've even got a website now where they made available a lot of the evidence and photographs and everything they had of that particular event.
So October 7 isn't what we're talking about, right?
Right, well, that part was October 7th. For the military operations in the Gaza Strip, we're looking at like civilian to militant casualties.
So what human rights organizations have affirmed that Israel has used reasonable precautions in the Gaza Strip to prevent civilian deaths? Because I've seen not one.
Well, I don't think you would attest that they're using reasonable cautions. You would take issue if they weren't. And I think generally all of the language that I see is Israel needs to be cautious. So for instance, even for like the ICJ stuff, they were saying, hey, make sure you guys are being careful that you're not genociding people. Like, make sure that you're not doing this, and like give us a report in a month to see how it's going.
So Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, UN, UNRWA, also UNHCR, but I'll just say UNRWA for now. All of them have expressed concern with Israel's tactics,
which is fair.
So when I asked the question, well, what human rights organizations you said if the reason you wouldn't just trust Israel on its face, or the reason you would believe Israel is not because they said it, but because it's been substantiated by these other bodies. And when I'm asking which of these other bodies have substantiated it, they've actually done the opposite.
No, expressing caution is not done the opposite, right?
Dude, this is such a silly argument that Destiny's making. He's literally flip-flopping. He is flip-flopping, like this person wrote in his comments over here. Brother, for the most part, the third-party organizations have condemned Israel's actions, not only just since like October 7th and everything that's happened since then, but for decades they've condemned Israel. There isn't like a third-party organization that ever really substantiates Israel that says that they're doing the right thing, unless they're like the ADA or some sort of like a Zionist lobby here in America. They're the only ones that really ever say that Israel's in the right. For the most part, the non-profit organizations around the world, whenever they look into the case of Palestine, they're always criticizing and saying what Israel is doing wrong. In general, they don't really ever say that what Israel is doing is the right thing. Like a very weird thing. And then he's trying to say, oh, well, they don't, they're just giving them caution. No, they're not giving them caution. That's what happened with the case. This is the weird thing is that Mark has been successfully able to ask Destiny the right questions that on Destiny's face value, he thinks it sounds like he knows what he's talking about. But when you start asking him these questions and it starts to break down, you start to really realize, like, dude, you're grasping at straws here. Your arguments are actually very weak. So kudos to Mark to actually really being able to expose this.
Time there's a military anything, you would expect.
No. They've done more. Okay, so but
Well, has anybody like said like Israel is violating international law?
Yes, Alberto Guterres has done that. The head of the UN, Francesca Albanese has done that.
Have they said Israel is violating international law, or are they saying it would be a violation of international law if Israel
are? They're saying they are.
If you want, I'm curious.
Just even asking that question itself shows how little he really understands. It's very strange.
I'll do that right now. But again, your claim was, I believe Israel because it's been. I don't believe any nation state on their face. I believe it when other people substantiate it.
Yeah,
I'm saying. But when I ask who has substantiated, you're simply saying they haven't not substantiated it.
No. When you asked me for the substantiation, we're mixing a little bit. I was talking about the October 7th attacks was where a lot of independent journalists or other nations' journalists were brought in, and they were allowed to look at basically all the footage and the evidence, the forensic stuff collected, and make their evaluations on what happened. That would have been
on the Hamas attack. Yes, on the Hamas attack, absolutely.
For the stuff going on the attacks in Gaza, other people are trying to verify the numbers. I mean, at the end of the day, these all come from the Gazan Health Ministry and the IDF, which are really the only two sources we can rely on, and then U.S. intelligence making statements or open source intelligence making statements about, like, for instance, initially, people had claimed that Israel had bombed the parking lot of that one hospital, and a ton of independent people looked into it, and they arrived at the conclusion that it was most likely a mortar failure or something. These are the types of things I'm looking at. I wouldn't just go by Israel saying, like, oh, look, we said this thing, or by video footage and stuff that Israel's releasing, and like evaluating that and looking at other people's evaluations of that. I agree that we shouldn't just take Israel at face value.
Right, but what I'm saying is, no. First of all, Israel is blocked. So there's a couple of things here. One, again, the organizations are saying that these are. And again, we may say, well, we don't trust the UN, but the UN organizations have expressed not just grave concern, although that is a thing, right? To say, hey, we're trying to give humanitarian aid, we're being blocked. We are trying. Electricity has been cut off. We're asking Israel to undo what it's done. If Israel does X and the human rights organizations say stop doing X in order to not violate international law, that is saying you're violating international law.
I mean, like I said, I read the ICJ opinion, and they didn't say to stop doing X. They just said be careful. There's a possibility that you might be genociding people. Like, you need to take every precaution and be careful.
Destiny being bad faith. Here we go.
But that's not exculpatory, right?
I didn't say it was exculpatory. I'm just saying.
No.
Yeah. Or God.
What I'm saying is, the purpose of that hearing was not to make a determination about whether or not they were committing genocide.
Correct. It was a statutory thing, basically.
Right.
Like, yeah.
So, right. So it's like if I get accused of robbing a bank, and I go in for my preliminary hearing, and my lawyer's like, "Can we drop this charge?" And the judge looks at the video footage of me with a mask on, and says that. there's reason to think you might have done this. We're gonna proceed to trial, and then I walk out saying the judge didn't say I was guilty. Judge didn't say I robbed. Of course not. That wasn't what it was for.
Sure.
And Israel has actually trumpeted that decision or the response of the court in a way that would suggest that somehow the court's failure to say that they were committing genocide, or in my example, the judges or jury's the decision to say that I didn't rob the bank, is somehow evidence that I wasn't doing something wrong.
I 1,000,000,000% agree. It could be that in 1 month, the ICJ, because you're correct, I agree with you, this ruling was to make sure that South Africa had grounds to bring the case, and that prima facie it looked like it could have been, is there a genocide happening? Well, they looked at the facts, like, there's a lot of civilian deaths. There's been a lot of crazy statements, I agree, by Israeli leadership. Yes. It's possible. We'll look into it. I'm not citing that to say like, oh, well, look, they didn't say to stop right now, right? You're at pre-trial, so you must be innocent. I'm just saying that I'm not aware of any credible organization that said, we are saying 100% this is a war crime. I'll see a lot of things saying like, if Israel targeted this hospital just to kill civilians, that's a war crime. Or if Israel continues to do this, this is a war crime. Collective punishment, if they engage in this, that's a war crime. But I haven't heard any resolute statements of like, and I might have just missed those. That's why I'm just curious if like for an article.
First of all, groups like the UN are never going to say you're committing the war crime because they have an actual court to make that determination. So just as a diplomatic matter, they rarely will say you're doing this.
Okay, that's fair, but that's a different statement earlier when you were like, they've said they're committing war crimes.
I'm only speaking about the UN. I'm only speaking about the UN.
Okay.
I'm going to the other ones, but the other ones have said that. But I'm saying the UN won't say that. What the UN will say is, similar to what the ICJ said is, look, there's a chance you're committing war crimes. We're not saying you're committing war crimes, but it's plausible you are. These statements sound crazy. It sounds like you're advocating genocide. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to tell you not to do these 4 things.
Yeah.
Right? And what are those 4 things? The literal textbook definition of genocide. It would be like the judge saying, look, I'm not saying you robbed the bank, but what I am going to say is, until trial, don't go in any banks, don't wear any ski masks, don't slip any notes to tellers. I'm not saying you're a bank robber, but I am saying, like, in the future, don't request sums of money that aren't in your account. And that's effectively what the court did. They're saying, we're not saying you did, but we're saying the emergency measure was designed to stop them from doing the things that they're doing. Now, the problem is, and I think this is where, again, the differential interpretations of international law come in, is that Israel's saying, well, that's what we've always been doing. We've always taken reasonable precaution. Yeah. We've always done all the things. And so Israel's definition of reasonable precaution is wildly different, I think, than the bulk of the international community.
Potentially, which is why I think it's good that the ICJ, as part of that ruling, said you need to prepare a report in 1 month and then we'll go over it. I think that was a good thing for the ICJ to do, and I would hope that Israel would, to some extent, as best they can, participate in that to hopefully exonerate themselves in the eyes of the International Court of Justice. I think that was a good thing for them to do. Yeah.
Oh no, I think you're right about I'm pulling up an article simultaneously now. I think you're right. The ICJ's decision was important. The ICJ's involvement was important. I hope the ICC's involvement will also come in soon, so that we can actually have an international body. I mean, Israel's already said, though, no matter what the ICJ says, we're not going to do anything different. So again, if the courts rule that these are war crimes being committed, Israel's saying we're still going to do the same thing. So again, Israel's position is not, we don't think we're committing war crimes, but let's let a dispassionate third party decide. They're saying we're going to do what we're going to do regardless.
I understand that that's true, but I think we both agree, though, that there is going to be some like tough talk from politicians that won't completely line up with military action. So, for instance, there have been, I won't even say borderline, there have been like genocidal statements made by some Israeli leaders or some members of the Israeli government.
Yeah, keyword here, some, but actually it's a lot of, even president and the prime minister have all said genocidal statements. It's one thing to say it's like tough talk. To label genocidal statements as tough talk is pretty strange, especially when the own military, the IDF themselves, are often caught repeating the same talking points that the leaders say. So when your leaders say something, it actually holds great significance, and it's actually very hypocritical of Destiny to kind of minimize these things here, because whenever he makes the case about like Trump, and he talks about Trump, when he was talking about Trump inciting January 6th riots for insurrection and so on and so forth, and that he should be tried for to the fullest extent of the law, he's taking Trump and taking his statements and putting it to its maximum, right? How serious those statements are from the leader of the country and so on and so forth. Now, when you have a leader in right, when you have the leaders in Israel saying genocidal statements, and he's admitting that these are genocidal statements, and he's saying, well, they're just tough talk. There's a clear like double standard here. But I don't understand how he gives so much leeway to Israel, make all these kinds of claims about them, that he wouldn't even do for his own country. That's the weird and very strange part to me here.
For sure, and they say those things, and they're in a post-October 7th mindset, and they want to look tough to their civilian population. But I think it's pretty clear when you look at how the military is operating that they are trying their best to stay within the quarters of international law, because they know that if they, like for instance, that Israel lost a lot of international support in the days following that parking lot explosion, when people were accusing them of having blown up that hospital. Israel's response to that, and you can see when they get accused of things like that, their response to the white flag thing when they shot those 3 Israeli hostages, their response to that hospital parking lot bombing that people initially accused them of, their response wasn't, well, we said we were going to do whatever we want. Fuck you guys. We're going to do whatever we want. We're big dogging it. We don't care about you guys. They were like, ho, hold on. This was a huge, it's kind of like when Russia like saber rattles and like, we're moving our nukes because we're going to bomb you guys. But they do everything very much in the open so that the rest of the world can see, so that they're not going to do people, right? I agree with you that the rhetoric is troubling. I'm trying to look at action on the ground. And I think for the most part, when you look at the civilian deaths, which are tragic, but you look at the percentage of military people killed, or at least claimed by Israel to be killed, and you look at the actions so far, it doesn't. What?
I say which we disagree on. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. What do you think is like or actually wait, if you want to find that article,
Here's
I'd be
something
so
from
curious.
Amnesty to give you an example of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Amnesty International visited the site of the strike on 2 occasions. These are 2 military strikes that took place in private homes. I'll give you the date in a second. I'll shoot you the article as well. But this article is recent. It's February 12th. So it's today the 12th. Yeah. And this is Amnesty International, and the diplomatic or the language of these organizations, I'll just say. What they said was, let me see. I lost my place, but give me 1 second. They basically said that there was no. Amnesty International's research did not find evidence that any of those staying in the house that was directly hit were affiliated with an armed group. The organization's research also did not find any indication that there were military objectives in or near the houses.
Are we talking about is this the Goldstone report or?
No. This is the Goldstone report is from before. Which,
from a long time ago. Is this right now from
the strike? I'm talking about in Rafah now.
Okay, the Rafah. Okay, gotcha. Just making sure.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about now. I mean, we go to the Goldstone report, which is its own fiasco.
Do you want to link me real quick what you're reading, just so I can have it up on screen?
Yeah. What's the? Let me. I'll DM it to you real quick. Oh wait, I'm a little tech challenged here. Oh, I can probably copy it right into here. I think.
Wait, if you want on the bottom of the Zoom, if you click, there might be a more button where it says there's like a chat.
Boomer.
Yeah, I was trying to see if I'm hooked to the same Wi-Fi, I can copy from my iPhone and paste it through my computer. I'm on 2 devices. That's what I'm.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. While you do that, I'm just curious. Where did you said you're a professor? Where do you teach at? Do you say that?
City University of New York, CUNY Graduate Center.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. Gotcha.
Yeah. It's not working, but if you go to here, I'll just pull up on the computer. It'll be easier that way.
Sure.
Yeah, but yeah, I teach there. I've just started there actually. I was at Temple University for years.
Are you teaching like the same level of student, or are you?
Yeah, well, I teach only. Before I taught some undergrad and a lot of grad students. Now I only teach grad students. The Graduate Center is sort of a. The idea is that we only do graduate students there. It's sort of like it was designed like the CUNY system was like it's all over New York, all the City College, Hunter College, Brooklyn College, etc. And then in the 40s and 50s they created like a kind of PhD granting center that would sort of meet the needs of the entire city of New York. Sort of like the public Ivy kind of situation, I guess they would call it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. It's a pretty cool place to be. Paul Krugman's there. It's a lot of big time scholars are there.
Gotcha. Yep. Oh, yeah, that link worked. Thanks. Awesome.
Okay, let me see. I want to make sure that's the one I sent you. Yeah, I think that's the one I mean, I want to make sure it's the same one I'm reading.
Okay, new evidence of unlawful Israeli attacks in Gaza causing massive civilian casualties amid real risk of genocide. Okay, so we can read more of this if you want. I have no problem doing that. I'm guessing you've read this. So one of my issues sometimes for reporting like this is for an attack, for a civilian attack, or I'm sorry, let me be very precise with my language. And then you can tell me if you disagree on the international law on this. If Israel bombs a place and the target is civilians, that is a war crime. You cannot explicitly target civilians. That would be a war crime. Right. If Israel targets a place and there's a military combatant there, but say there's like one ordinary soldier and 100 civilians, and it's almost impossible to make a war effort argument for that much collateral damage, we would consider that a war crime. Now, if there's like 10 key commanders and 100 civilians, well, the proportionality cost gets murky, maybe not a war crime. Here's a fourth scenario that I think is really hard, and it's frustrating when I read these sometimes. There's a big frustration I have with the Goldstone report is, if it's the case, so when Amnesty International investigates, and it looks like 95 civilians, nearly half of the children, killed in 4 unlawful strikes in Rafah, I'm guessing, since you linked me to this, the argument that this is going to make is when they did an investigation in the area, there is no evidence that there were military objectives there.
That's literally what they say, there was no indication of no military objectives in or near the houses.
Yep.
And that no one in the house that was hit
was like related to Hamas or anything, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So I think this points in a concerning direction. However, if it was the case that Israel had intelligence at the time or had reason to believe that these were military objectives, it wouldn't be a war crime or a contravention of international law if they did do these strikes, which is one of the reasons why sometimes it's frustrating when these reports are put out and there's no pressure.
Yeah, but how many times, the question you need to ask yourself then is, how many times do these situations arise? At a certain point, you cannot just continue to give benefit of the doubt to somebody if they continuously violate. You can't just continuously kill civilians and then say, oh, well, we thought there were people there. We thought there were people there. We thought there were people there. So even though he may want to extend the benefit of the doubt towards Israel, the issue is that there's been the civilian death count is way too high. They've already tried using variously other things to justify high civilian death count. They didn't even come out themselves and necessarily say that they had suspected of a target. He's putting that out there himself, which, to be honest with you, they haven't earned that benefit of the doubt. So it's very strange to kind of make that argument, especially situation in Rafah. There you have over a million. It's a lot higher than that. Over 1 million people in a densely packed area. It's like a village, almost the size of a village or whatever, and near the border of Egypt, and they have nowhere else to go. So it's strange to even want to try to even do a military operation in the first place over there, which is why President Biden himself literally warned Israel before they did anything to be careful, to not do a military operation there. He warned them against it, which Israel doesn't listen to Biden. They don't listen to the United States. They just do whatever they want to do.
Pressure on Israel, or there's no reach out to Israel to corroborate why did you do this particular attack. As another example, do you remember after we pulled out of Afghanistan, I believe the United States drone struck, I think it was a Doctors Without Borders hospital. I think a lot of civilians were, it was a horrific, it just sucked. But the reason why that wasn't considered a war crime is because the United States most likely wasn't intentionally trying to kill doctors. There was really bad intel that led to a bad attack, but it wasn't an
intentional. I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair. I think the difference is, with Israel, we hear case after case, house after house, refugee camp after refugee camp. We keep hearing, oh, we thought there was Hamas there. And all we see is family members. Or we see a case where they'll say that someone has some loose affiliation with a terrorist or an armed group. And so we either have to believe that Israel's really bad at this, or we could believe that they are deliberately targeting civilians, right? Which is not necessarily my argument.
Sure. That's fair.
My argument is actually that they're wildly indifferent to whoever they hit.
Sure. So I think the two things I would look at, so I think we both agree, the idea of them like, I'm going to kill this family. Probably not happening, because that would be crazy. The argument that you're making is more reasonable.
I'm not completely dismissing that.
Okay, we won't completely dismiss it, but we'll say that's probably a low. But well, if I'm steel manning your position, if I was to argue your side, I would say maybe Israel's not intentionally targeting that, but the level of discretion that they're using is almost non-existent if they happen to do 4 separate strikes in Rafah where there are no military targets found. Whatever proportionality analysis or intelligence is using is woefully inadequate to minimize the risk to civilian casualties, right?
That's right.
So I think that that's a good starting point. We just have to dig in.
And that's kind of the whole point of where they were arguing before in the first place, because to actually attack an area that is inhabited by civilians, you have to have just cause, and you have to give people warning. So people in Rafah, not only were they not given any warning when they started to attack, but they didn't even have enough evidence to support the fact that there was actually military targets there to begin with to even justify the attack. So it's funny, but Destiny just skated past all of that. And to be honest, Mark should have probably held his feet to the fire a little bit more over there as well.
Into the Israeli side to see their justification for the attack, which I understandably leads to the frustration of like, well, sometimes Israel doesn't always participate in evidence gathering. So, for instance, for the Goldstone report, I think Israel explicitly said
never participate in evidence gathering.
Yeah, true. And it's hard to compel a state to do so as long as the state has their own investigatory bodies. Because again, remember the Geneva Conventions, you want everybody to participate, and nobody really wants to submit themselves to the ICJ, like having full authority over things, unless there's really, really, really good reason to do so. But like, I would agree, for instance, that this points in a concerning direction, but does not a war crime make, I would say.
So if we were talking, I mean, nation states in general are violent and bloody, and so again, I don't think Israel is uniquely such. I think they're just at a particular moment in their historical development that's different than Australia or the United States or other countries or Canada or other countries that, you know, they got their hands dirty much longer ago, and so we kind of look at it as a historical relic as opposed to people who are still here fighting. But nevertheless, it would be much easier to accept Israel's perspective, obviously, if not for international human rights organizations like Amnesty, if not for the UN, but also it would also be such, it would also be easier if Israel hasn't, from the very beginning, from its very formation, been structured to do this very thing. Right, Israel is a settler colonial state.
Sure. Wait, real quick before we go from this point, okay?
Yeah.
I have to put just a quick pin on this, okay? Because I had very low expectations when I saw your Twitter account and everything else. I assume it's gonna be a wild debate. This has been the best conversation I've had on this so far, so I'm super grateful for the conversation so far. Thank you so much. I just want to say one point of agreement I think we can have is I wish there was a better compulsionary body that can force countries somehow, I don't know what that would look like, to make available some evidence of the attacks they do. Because I think we can both agree on this. It might be the case that in every single Israeli attack, they really did have good intel, or they were trying their best, and unfortunately, highly dense populated areas, shit happens. And if I'm being good faith, I would have to acknowledge there could be the case that sometimes Israel, in the post-October 7th fervor, in like the heat of military shit, they don't do a good proportionality cost. I'm like, you know what, fuck it, we might lose 2 soldiers, it's gonna look bad in an election, just fucking bomb this house, you know, maybe we'll take it out, hopefully nobody notices. I think that the photos, the videos of those 3 guys with the white flags getting shot, that should be a wake-up call to people that blindly defend all IDF reporting, because it's like, hey, if they shot 3 guys that were hostages, would we have even heard about this if they were Palestinians? Would we even know? Or is this happening regularly? So I wish there was a way to make that information available on some level of compulsion, which is why I think the ICJ case, from what I understand, is good, because it forces them to file that report with the International Court of Justice to hopefully at least give them some insight to make a determination. I think that would be, I don't know how you do that because of states being unwilling to participate in those things, but yeah.
And Israel being particularly unwilling to do that. They never let any UN.
It feels so weird for Destiny to say that, just because he was literally holding water for Israeli state and giving them all the possible benefits of doubt, even inferring things upon them which they haven't even said themselves. And I guess you do have to give a little bit of credit for Mark, coming from his like teaching background. He's able to maintain a level of calm that gets through to him on this topic. was more one-sided on it than he would care to admit. But personally, I did think that there was a possibility for him to shift his position. And I think Mark overall did like a very good job, just not being turning this into like a blood sport, but being able to really take the conversation in a direction where there was a lot of fruitfulness to it, but also able to answer the questions and demystify some of the answers that Destiny was looking for, even for the stuff that he was claiming for himself. Pretty strange. Yeah.
Repertoire and including the current present one, Francesca Albanese, they've been very cagey about letting journalists in, and when they do, they've guided them to very specific areas. And even people who are fairly middle of the road, like Clarissa Ward at CNN, when they see it, they're like, "This is awful," right? When you look at you know, when you look at ICC in the past, you know, they're not party to the Rome Statute. When you look at every effort to participate, Israel has largely said no thanks, right? Yeah. And not just them. Again, the United States is really bad at participating in this stuff too.
I mean, yeah, the U.S. literally, if somebody went to Hague, like we would go to war with them. I think we said that explicitly. You're never holding U.S. soldiers to account under the International Court of Justice. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of us are bad at this stuff. Mm-hmm. But again, to the point for me is that Israel is not simply engaged in an unforeseeable or unforeseen war.
Sure. Real quick to hit on that, and I think this is an issue that the international community has coming up, is Israel's kind of Israel's butt for these kinds of excuses all the time has always been, we feel like the international community is against us or holds us to unfair standards. And I think the things that they point to can argue are toothless condemnation. So they might say, why does Amnesty International spend so much time condemning us? Why is the United Nations passed more resolutions on us than literally every other country combined? Why is it that 63 or whatever Muslim majority countries are always voting in a bloc to condemn us? This feels unfair. And, you know, maybe Israel complains, maybe they really just are in the wrong, and that's why people are, you know, complaining about them. Or maybe they are kind of in the wrong, and there's people that have potential biases against them, but, you know, that's still something they need to address. But I think something that really hurts a lot of the international case as of recently, and maybe we disagree on the facts for some of this, I think a lot of the stuff coming out about the UNRWA relating to, first it was just 12 Hamas people that were participating on October 7th that were part of the UNRWA. Now I think the highest number that I saw was maybe around 10% of them are part of it. And then now I think it was either just today or yesterday, there was like a massive military facility right underneath. I think it was a UNRWA headquarters that they're all claiming they didn't know about. And my final point was that very hospital, the Al-Shifa hospital, that there were workers at, doctors saying, no, we've never seen people use this as a terrorist base. We've never seen Hamas people. Well, footage came out later that because those statements were made after October 7th. Well, on October 7th, we saw hostages being taken into that hospital. So I think Israel probably feels a little bit vindicated. Like, well, look, some of these international orgs are trying to fuck us, especially the UNRWA. How do you expect us to trust them?
Yeah, I think the UNRWA has been a thorn in Israel's side since 1949. You know, I'll say since 1948, frankly. Mm-hmm. And they've done everything they can to discredit UNRWA, and certainly in the Netanyahu era. Mm-hmm. Discrediting UNRWA has been a primary project of his, and when Trump was in office, he effectively managed to not shut it down, but dismantle it considerably by cutting all the U.S. funding out of it. The argument that first it was 12 people, you're right. When we look at the dossier, mm-hmm. according to sources, again, Channel 4 News,
sure.
Daily Beast, you know, I haven't seen it. I can't. I'm completely transparent. Yep. I'd love to see it. Have not seen it. Mm-hmm. But when I look at it, when I look at what's been reported, that number seems to drop from 12 to like 6. And what's in the actual dossier, and there's no substantiated evidence in any of it. No person who has seen the dossier, no journalist, no independent organization who's seen the dossier has made the case that Israel has given proof of these relationships. That's the first thing.
Okay.
Now, in the second piece of it, to your other point, which
it's basically just Israel's word, and the United States just backed it up.
Affiliations, but again, how you define a Hamas affiliation is very, very important in a place where Hamas is not simply some rogue militant group that took over. This isn't Daesh, right? This isn't ISIS or ISIL, right? This is the government. This is a democratically elected government that has control over state facilities. So if I am a doctor at El Ahli Hospital, you might say that I have a Hamas affiliation. Just like the journalist who works for state radio was said to be a Hamas affiliated,
propaganda outlet or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, no, a Hamas affiliated journalist.
Sure. Okay. Sure.
Yeah. So it's
just to be super clear, I wish I could find it. I do agree, and I even tweeted out on the day that 10% was announced because the wording on that, I wish I could remember the original outlet. The wording was pretty ambiguous, and obviously Hamas is the government in the area. So when they said 10% have like ties to Hamas, I think that does have to be really carefully evaluated because, like, well, Hamas is the literal fucking government. So what do we mean when we say that? Because that number could blow up to a huge amount. That's the same thing as saying like, oh, this guy was CIA affiliated because like his dad was in the CIA, or this guy, works for the feds because he was an informant and he informed one time 20 years ago, right? So I agree with you, and I even tweeted that out on the day. Oh, that we'd be careful.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But you realize that that's also the problem with saying our intelligence says there's Hamas folk in that house or in that refugee camp or in that village. Those very same standards are being given. That's my point.
Sure, potentially. But I mean, like for the UNRWA stuff, I'm pretty sure their head dropped out, and I'm pretty sure like several, I think even humanitarian groups have condemned UNRWA now. Now I don't know if they're just rushing prematurely or something, but
no. What the head said was what he said was he said we fired the people to give the appearance of propriety. He said basically we did the reverse of innocent until proven guilty, so we could keep this train going. So there would be no risk of looking like we're not cooperative and like we're not like we have something to hide. We fired 12 people, some of whom had no connection to anything, like even remotely. We don't even get it, but we did it anyway. And then the more we looked, the more we realized we had no reason to fire them. They're more frustrated, and yet still the United States and other countries did what they cut the funding.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I'm guessing because normally they're pretty resistant to Israel, screaming like, "Oh, this is bullshit, this is bias, blah blah blah." The fact that they're cutting funding now, I think. I'm sorry. Also, the head of the UNRWA did not drop out. My bad. If people are actually cutting funding, I mean, I'm guessing they saw something. I need to dig.
No, he explicitly said no. I mean, we can question his motives. We can say maybe he doesn't mean what he said, but what he actually said was there was no reason. I did it. I did it to basically to play ball with you guys, and basically like I mean, I'll put it in layman's terms. But basically, what he said is, I did all this shit to make you guys happy, so you wouldn't think I was a part of it, and then you cut the funding anyway, right? I mean, that's basically what he said. I was trying to see if I can get his exact quote here, but yeah, there was no evidence of it, and I think that
essentially this whole attack on the UNRWA, which is the UN aid that they give to Palestine, it's just another way of making life miserable for Palestinians. If they can create a situation where, they have surviving or living in Palestine, it's not acceptable enough, or they want to leave to neighboring countries, this is an acceptable outcome, of course, for Israel, and they're willing to do this. So just another like campaign of attack. Also, of course, smearing as well to try to claim that, this is a Hamas organization. If anything pro-Palestinian all of a sudden becomes a Hamas organization or whatever, there's just another attack on the Palestinian people to try to make life more miserable for them in the hopes that they'll just end up leaving the land and going to the neighboring countries, if the neighboring countries will end up taking them, of course. So it's a cucked situation there.
That's what's frustrating. Not to mention, I mean, we won't even talk about the timing of it coming out on the day of the ICJ decision. It seemed like just an opportunity to discredit the UN and discredit the whole process and say even the body that's making the determination about us is in on the fix.
Yeah, but I feel like I'm trying to think. I'm trying to rack my brains. I don't hear many statements. I feel like the United States is the big supporter of Israel. I don't know if like Europe is as necessarily bought into the whole Israel outfit as the U.S. is. I feel like
Germany. You wouldn't say that about Germany.
I feel like if European countries are starting to cut funding, like more than just like, a Muslim majority country, I feel like there's probably something there, but admittedly, I need to look more.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, no country has said that there's anything there. Again, I'm not saying like I don't trust them or I don't believe them. They themselves are saying, look.
Sure.
What they said is we're going to do an investigation, but we're going to cut funding until the investigation, which is sort of ironic given the fact that they're dropping a shitload of money into Israel's coffers while waiting for an ICJ investigation, while waiting for an ICJ decision, while waiting for other international bodies to make decisions, effectively saying Israel will be funded until proven guilty. They probably funded even if proven guilty, whereas they're saying UNRWA will only be funded if the investigation proves to not be the case. And what I'm hearing in back channel wise, and some reports are saying this, is that the U.S. expects to refund UNRWA. They expect the money to start flowing again, but you look really bad. It's one thing to say, look, UNRWA is shitty for all these reasons. So, but we're gonna keep funding them because it's the lifeblood. But when you say it's connected to October 7th, which is like saying 9/11, you know what I mean? You now have to pull back just for optics' sake. And Israel played this masterfully. They left nations with no choice.
Maybe, I guess. Did you see the story that came out like very recently? I think it was in the past week with the huge data center that was uncovered under the Gaza headquarters. That the ones where all the UN RWA workers were like, we had no idea this was under there, but it was like a massive data center that was used by Hamas. I think this came out just a few days ago.
I did not see that. I need to take, just give me 1 second. I just need to make one quick phone call.
Yeah, you're good.
I'm new to the streaming life, so.
You're good. The following camera.
It's funny. This camera just followed him all the way out.
So I saw like headlines for this story, but I haven't actually like dug into it yet. I disagree with this guy a lot, but this guy's like has the best engagement. He's like responding to things that I'm saying. I feel like he's not farming for TikTok clips, and our disagreements I think are relatively substantive. So Jesus, I thought this was gonna be a 30-minute screaming match. We were gonna be done. So especially because this guy, he didn't seem like anybody that billed himself as like a foreign policy Israel-Palestine expert. He just seemed like a professor. So the fact that he seems to be like one of the best combos we've had so far for this, which is really shocking to me.
Yeah, which is funny because Mark is really good when it comes to Palestine. He's known for that too.
I would say, if anything, be very cautious. I would say that the ICJ ruling is a very slight hit against Israel. My understanding, and I skimmed this, it was an 11-page report, and I skimmed it, if I'm being honest. I might have missed something, but because a lot of people are saying that report said stuff that it didn't. But when I skimmed it, it seemed like the purpose of that ICJ report was to analyze the complaint from South Africa and then see prima facie, are there enough facts here, and does South Africa have the standing to bring this particular case to the ICJ? Given the facts that they presented, is it reasonable to assume that there might be a case here that the ICJ has jurisdiction under, that the South Africa has standing to bring, and that the crime of genocide might actually be being committed, and that when the ICJ looked at all of the facts, they said, well, it's plausible, there are a lot of civilian deaths, there are crazy statements by Israeli leaders, and then they looked at South Africa and they say they have reason to bring this case, they totally have standing to do it, and then from there they think they can compel Israel to file a report at the end of the month saying like, hey, you need to prove to us that this isn't happening because we think that South Africa's made a valid argument to bring this case here. Yeah, so I would say if anything, it was like a slight point against Israel. I wouldn't say it favors them. It was just like a pre-evidentiary thing that said that, well, you know, this is possible, this is going on, is what I said. Yeah. Sorry, how's it going?
Yeah.
Historical. You wanted to do the settled thing, yeah.
It's just a nation that is founded on ethnic cleansing, right, and on transfer. It stretches credulity to think that when at every opportunity they've done both of those things, that suddenly now, as people are literally saying, we want to resettle people. Now they've talked about voluntary resettlement, to be sure, to be fair. But that voluntary resettlement, they've also talked about voluntary deporting, voluntary, you know, they use these voluntary words while creating impossible conditions for staying. They've pleaded for the Egyptian government to receive these people. They've chided the Arab leaders for not taking more Palestinians, when at every moment when they've done that, they haven't been allowed back in, whether it's 48, whether it's 67. And so I think a big part of this for me is the historical backdrop to it. There's literally no reason to believe that Israel's doing anything other than what it's always done. And this has been the method.
So I don't know how much time you have, and we don't have to dig into the whole history. When I look at 48, when I look at 67, and then when I look at all of the surrounding Arabs versus the basically European Jews, I look at the history of the conflict, the way that it seems to me is that I think that Israel, if you look at early statements, whether we're talking Theodore Herzl or whether we're talking Ben Gurion and all the following, you know, IDF turned prime ministers, it seems like Israel has always wanted to expand, right? Eretz Israel, I think, is what a lot of them would call it. You know, we need to have greater Israel, this whole thing. It seemed like that was always the goal, but I think that all of the Israeli leadership has been relatively realistic in that they know that they need some sort of international ally. They know they need some sort of international community. Otherwise, Israel's in a sea alone against a bunch of enemies that will destroy her. It feels like, while I'm sympathetic towards that argument that Israel's always tried to expand, I think the problem historically is that all of the surrounding Arabs have always given Israel a really good reason to do so. That all of the territory that Israel has acquired, even if initially maybe we were thinking like, oh, it seems like that's kind of shady, the surrounding states have always given them either a casus belli for war or just a really valid reason to acquire territory. And we can go through any of the individual territory acquisitions and then argue the historical context around this, but I feel that very strongly about all the territory that Israel has acquired.
Yeah, but you begin from the premise that it's illegal to acquire land by force, right?
Well,
we don't begin there then.
Well, the issue is like,
it's hilarious
when we say that. So,
said wow.
What we run into is we take a modern framing of the issue and then we retroactively superimpose this on Israel Palestine, and then we try to make arguments that I don't think make the most amount of sense. So let me say this. So Resolution 242 agreed with you that you don't take land through military acquisition, right? And Israel made a commitment to give some territory back. Now they fought very hard for the wording on that, not all of it, but to return some territory back after the 67 war. But the issue is that the initial territory that was acquired was all through military conquest, which makes this particular situation very murky to sort out. So in 48, there was no country in mandatory Palestine. Well, in 47, there was no country. In 48, when Israel declared independence, they were the only country that existed in mandatory Palestine. All of the other acquired territory came through military conquest. Syria moved in from the north. Jordan took the west bank of the River Jordan, and Egypt took the entire Sinai and the Gaza Strip. Now, all of that territory, Israel is the only party there that technically kind of was owed that territory because that was the only country that emerged from the mandatory Palestine period. All of the other neighbors around her took that territory through conquest, and nobody seemed to care that much then. They all called to go back to the partition plan borders. But then once the Six-Day War happened in 67 and Israel conquered all the territory, now people are like, well, hold on. You can't have territory acquired through conquest. You need to give that back. We'll give it back to who? Because the Jordan... go ahead.
So a couple corrections here. So, I mean, all right. So the UN, if by that position we'd be ignoring a couple of points, including the UN partition plan itself and who the land was designated for. I'm sorry. Give me 10 seconds. I'm just trying.
You're totally fine. No problem.
Manage something here.
Yep.
And I'm not good at doing two things at once.
Yeah, you're fine.
West.
Oh shit.
This is an interesting platform too. Okay.
All right, boomers.
People in chat were saying that you've done mainstream media appearances, and obviously as like a YouTuber, and as I talk to more, like congressmen and everything, sometimes those appearances are fun, but it's really, really, really frustrating when somebody brings you on.
They're gonna have to move it along there, buddies. Jerking off while he's looking up stuff. All right.
That this was a military occupation, and again, that this land had to be ultimately returned. I get the idea of saying we can't take old frameworks and apply them, but these aren't ancient frameworks. I mean, the no land, the idea of not acquiring land through force is one of the spoils of World War I. I mean, the formation of the League of Nations, the idea that we don't have empires anymore, but we have nations is fundamentally to avoid this very thing. And even though again, the United States wasn't part of it, other civilized nations were. And by 1948, it was very clear. And you're right when you bring up 1967 and UN Resolution 242, and we could also, 242 and 338 kind of operated in tandem with one another. One to say, hey, we're going to stop all belligerent activity, we're going to stop all fighting, and then second to say, hey, we're going to respect the territorial integrity of Israel. That's important, and that's what the right to exist discourse was. That's what the right to exist meant. It didn't mean
wait, respect the territorial integrity. Are we talking about 67 or?
Yeah, I'm talking about UN Resolution 242.
Okay.
I'm saying it was a post 1967 war determination that was effectively saying we need to respect Israel's territorial integrity, i.e., Israel has it was the first affirmation of Israel's right to exist. That discourse obviously got co-opted later to mean something else, to mean exist as a Jewish state and all these other things. But at the core, it meant territorial integrity. It meant you can't take, again, we're not taking Israel by force. Israel's here to stay. This was a UN sort of backed commitment that the global community enforced. And even in the aftermath of 67, even Martin Luther King is talking about Israel, right? He's using that same language of 242, the right to exist, meaning territorial integrity. And so we were kind of all on the same page as a global community about what that meant. But what's the territory? Right? It didn't mean the goal line. It didn't mean the Sinai. And we know in the 70s, obviously after the October War and other things, we saw the return of some of that land. But fundamentally, the idea here was that a Palestinian state would have to exist at least partly on the land that was previously designated to them prior to the 1967 war. And what has happened is Israel has effectively said, we're never giving it back. They don't say that. they just never give it back.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there have been times where they have even explicitly said that under later administrations. Hold on, I'm letting somebody up real quick. Okay, sorry. I think that so some of the issue comes around, again, I think that the timelines on like what everybody is saying about these particular lands, I think it's really important. So again, for Resolution 242, I don't think that it ever explicitly calls for, like, it doesn't call for the creation of like a Palestinian state or even ensures a Palestinian state. The language just says, I think a rightful or a just resolution, I should know the exact words, to the refugee problem is essentially what the Palestinians get relegated to, is like the refugee problem. I don't think there's any explicit guarantees to, I don't even think even self-determination is initially brought up in that. I think that later on, I think in the late 60s or early 70s, I think the PLO and Israel through the negotiations will start to re-recognize 242 as saying like, okay, well, maybe this can include some right to self-recognition, or I'm sorry, to self-determination. But I think what 242 has meant has kind of changed as time has gone on. And I think there's been a lot of ambiguity historically what it means. So for instance, another thing too is people will say like, oh, 242 came out, everybody agreed that people have a right to their territory, et cetera, et cetera. Right after Resolution 242, there was the...
242 says withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict.
Yes. So
that's the important part though, right? It also says termination of all claims of or states of belligerency and respect for and acknowledgement of the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of every state in the area and their right to live in peace within secure and recognized boundaries free from threats or acts of force.
Correct, but when the Prime Minister of Israel, when they were fighting...
Yeah, but he's going to try to say that Palestine doesn't have a territorial right, seeing as how it's under occupation in the first place. So from them taking land, they can take land because there is no actual state of Palestine in the first place.
Fighting over the wordage for 242, that was very particular. It wasn't withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from all territories occupied. It just says from territories occupied in the recent conflict. When they would later negotiate peace with Sadat after Yom Kippur, Israel's contention was, well, we've actually satisfied our obligations under 242 because we gave some territories back that were occupied in the recent conflict. That's what I mean when I say that I feel like the definitions of 242 and what those territories meant, because it doesn't say all territories, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's very interesting, but again, that's sort of like the interpretation of international law that we were differing on when we were talking about what's going on in Gaza right now. It's like, the reasonable interpretation, I think, and the general global interpretation of UN Resolution 242 was Israel would withdraw from territories occupied. It didn't mean some territories or just...
nobody knew what it meant. That's why nothing particular was laid out, right? Because keep in mind, even the prior boundaries were only ones that weren't even recognized in 48. Because after 67, after the Six-Day War, there was literally the Khartoum Conference where every single Arab state said no recognition, no peace, and it was no recognition, no peace, and no trade. Fuck, what were the three no's? No recognition, no peace, no land, maybe. But like the Arab states had explicitly made it clear in Cairo that they were not working, that they were not going to be negotiating with Israel or recognizing her on any such terms, especially after that humiliating war. There was no way they were ever going to.
I disagree with that interpretation of the Khartoum resolution.
Of the three no's, where they said we're literally never going to recognize.
That's not what they said. So the three no's were no peace, no recognition, and no negotiations.
Yeah, but no recognition is.
Yeah, but so again, I'm going to pull up. I just want to pull up the text of it.
Yeah, sure.
So you can see because that's generally that is again an Israeli talking point, but that's not what the three no's meant. I mean, it's a very compelling sort of framing of the three no's.
What possible other interpretation? Yeah.
Well, I think they were very clear what they said. I mean, and when you look at what historians have said about it and other experts of it, they are very clear. It wasn't no peace. It was no formal peace treaty. It wasn't no negotiation. It was no direct negotiations, and it wasn't that there was no recognition. It was no de jure recognition.
Sure, I actually agree with you. I think
that's a very different representation of it than saying we don't want any peace, we don't want any recognition, we don't want any.
I agree with you. I super agree with you. I like you brought this up. It's very true. It wasn't that they wanted no peace whatsoever. I think part of the tragic history of Israel and the surrounding Arab states, I think, is both of these sides put themselves on trains that are inevitably headed to crash into each other, and they always do this by thriving in these ambiguous agreements and in these ambiguous statements with the hopes that they can leverage these down the line. So when you say no peace with Israel, it's not that they don't want any peace whatsoever. It's that if peace comes, it might not be official. It might be a rigid cold peace where they have some sort of just a ceasefire with no economic negotiations, and it might be a peace that leaves open future negotiations for either more military conflict, more land, or whatever. I think especially at 67, keep in mind, 67 was, puny, historically weak and hook-nosed, evil Jewish people somehow had militarily beaten all of these Arab states in the second, third war at that point. They were not in a position where they would have ever acquiesced to Israel owning territory there in any official sense. So I agree. They don't mean no peace like, oh, we'll never be peaceful. They just mean like, whatever peace we have, it is always going to be conditional on your ability to cooperate with us in this region. And that leaves it always open for future conflict, which unfortunately, well, for the Arabs, unfortunately for...
I was taking a step further, though. I think it was less abstract than that. I think it was no formal peace treaty until we had the formation of a state, of a legitimate Arab state. It wasn't just this abstract, like carrot and stick thing. It was...
That's what it was all about. It was always about the formation of a Palestinian state. This is the only reason why they held out for peace processes and to normalize relations and all these kinds of things, is that if the state of Palestine was not on the table and they were not going to receive their basic human rights, they weren't just going to play ball with Israel under Israel's own rules at all times. As a people, they have pride into themselves that we're going to hold out for what they feel is, their due, as well as the fact that it's their land, a lot of it that got taken away from them in the first place, most of it through military means. So they're stuck in a very bad position. So when a lot of these slogans and stuff like that might it might even sound bad or it might sound harsh or rough, but it always came from the fact that they wanted a basic, humanity given to them. They wanted their own homeland, and they had these slogans to kind of, support their cause until they received what they felt was due to them.
We recognize your territorial integrity, right? But we're not going to say formal recognition until what? There's an until there's a formation of a state, etc. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah, go for it. I read like 3/4 of that Scars of War, Wounds of Peace, and that book does a really good job at tying up like all of the history of this stuff, and it gives me more depth into this conversation too. So
Just gonna fast forward it here.
For them to feel, but I think Israel didn't really want peace either. They were just willing to go along, because they will take advantage of any military situation to situate themselves territorially even better. But again, I think the issue
that could be an October 7th argument, though. That's my point.
Yeah, it can be, but the issue is that then the surrounding Arab states have to stop walking into it over and over again. Like for instance, even for the 6-Day War, I think Israeli people wanted the West Bank, but they were realistic. There were 2 different communications to, I think it was Abdullah at the time, please do not attack us. Why are you attacking us? And then he loses the entire West Bank because he gets wrapped up in the war against Israel, and then Israel conquers the entirety of the West Bank because he attacked. But if he wouldn't have, there's a... Yeah, go ahead.
That's a different conversation. I do have to go in a second.
Yeah, you're fine.
The idea that even historians at this point even Israeli historians at this point acknowledge that was not a defensive war. Israel struck first. The argument now is not that Israel didn't strike first, it's that Israel needed to strike first and that it was a preemptive defensive war, which has been an argument that's been largely sort of dismissed in terms of rules of war and in terms of the international law. But Israel no longer claims that they were hit first. They claim that
Israel absolutely was not hit first. No, they did, I think, for about a month after the 6-Day War began, and then finally they said, no, we attacked first. Was it a preemptive war? Yeah, absolutely, considering they attacked first. Was it a justified preemptive war? I think that the conversation gets a lot more hairy at that point. I think the scary part for Israel is they were alone in the world with no allies. This was, I think, Ben Gurion's worst nightmare come to fruition, that Israel hadn't made strong allies in the West yet. The United States was unwilling to give guarantees for peace. They were surrounded by hostile Arab nations that now had the full support of the Soviet Union behind them. I do agree, now that I've read a lot more on this, I don't think even Egypt initially wanted to go to war. I think that all the Arab states, though, were playing this dangerous game of brinksmanship where they were all goading each other. If you remember, the Samu incident, and then the King of Jordan telling Egypt, well, look at you, you dog with your UN peacekeeping forces there. Syria was constantly goading attacks against Israel and Israel against Syria. And at some point, the situation built up to such that I think Israel could reasonably say, I feel like I'm about to get absolutely murked. All these people around me are about to kill me. I need to go to war first. I think it was fair for them to say that. I also think it's probably fair to say that they really didn't want to go to war, but man, they all hyped themselves up into it so much. It's hard to feel bad for them at the end of the day on it, I think.
I think if you begin from the place of saying that the entire formation of the Israeli state itself, take international law off the table for a minute, particularly since
it's hard to apply it anywhere here. But,
right. And if we begin at the end of the 19th century, it becomes even harder to sort of, international law is meaningless, right? And again, I don't want to retrofit.
Sure.
So the entire move by the admission of the kind of leaders of the Zionist movement, the political Zionist movement is itself a colonial move, and they were pretty honest about that, right? I mean,
I would be more clear. The only reason I don't like calling it colonial is because colony usually implies like Britain is making a colony, or France is making, like in Algeria, for instance, which ironically is how the Palestinians saw their fight sometimes. It is like a something, but calling it settler colonialism.
Ironically, Destiny trying to debate the word colonial is ironic just because of the fact that the people, the very first Zionists who came to Jerusalem, came to Palestine in the first place, sold themselves colonials and actually sold themselves as a colonial power. European elite force, essentially, that was coming to the Middle Eastern region and bringing their core, their principles, and their way of living. And they sold themselves distinctly different than the Palestinian people themselves. So, and they used the colonialists as a terminology unto themselves. So just arguing about this is pedantic. And this is the horrible thing about oftentimes throughout this debate, is that for the most part, there are many things that Destiny will just kind of argue about. He'll argue about colonialism. He'll argue about the term, the using children, when we're talking about kids under the age of 18, speaking to them about children, or when we start talking about apartheid state or certain of these labels, he always has a hard time accepting that, or even admitting to that. For him, these are contentious points of debate that he'll go back and forth on, which historically, with the experts and most people who look at these events, they pretty much agree on all of these terms as being accurate. Right. But for him, I guess morally and ethically, in the way it sounds, especially rhetorically, defending from those places and those points, he always will want to try to shed these terms and labels off as if, his opinion is one that truly matters here when it comes to what history takes into account.
Imperial colonial was a little different. The Arabs saw them as like Europeans coming in and being expansionists from European.
They saw themselves that way. Herzl himself said we're colonialists.
They saw themselves as part of the expansion, or they saw themselves as Westerners, but they weren't like a colony of America or Britain. Like they genuinely wanted to be part of that land with no loyalties overseas. That was like, they saw that as like the place to set up their new country. I agree that it was something like foreign for the Arabs there, and I agree the Arabs there saw them as like essentially European settler colonialists, but it's a little bit different than like Britain is setting up a colony here, I think.
It's a different type of, it's a different genre of, it's a different flavor of settler colonialism, because typically the colonizing power itself settles. I think that's true. But in this case, Britain is it is the British government that is allowing this colonial project to happen. It is through the British mandate system that we see the real kind of regimentation and codification through Balfour and other things of the colonial project that, again, the Zionists and particularly the revisionist Zionists, but I would say Herzl as well, but even when you get to Jabotinsky and others, they explicitly use the language of colonizing. They say it. So again, we can disagree with it, but it's a very
kind of it's like the child soldier argument. Right. I agree that it's like some kind of colonial thing. I would say it's a bit different. It's
a different type, yeah.
And it's also different. It's also hard because of the way that it started prior to 48. Like buying land and kicking people off of it, I understand feels bad, but like I remember for King Abdullah from Jordan, like he literally was saying, I think it was in regards to the Peel it was to the Simpson Commission. I think the quote of his is the Arabs are as prodigal in selling their land as they are in useless wailing and weeping about it, because even though they were complaining, some Arabs were complaining about Israelis moving in, other Arabs were happy to sell the land. Hey, buy this, I don't want it anymore, this is garbage, I'm leaving, kick out whoever you want and then leave. And I think that's like another complicating factor where it's like
but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, because the land system that the Palestinian population was used to was not one of modern capitalism.
Yeah.
And so if you're following the Mutual system and you're saying, look, it's kind of like it's not of our land. We kind of share it. We use it.
Yeah.
It's a different system. So again, I don't want to retrofit the kind of modern model of saying, okay, well, they were just giving away their land like Crazy Eddie giving away, going at a business sale. Sure. It wasn't like that. I think that wouldn't be accurate. But beyond that, the Palestinian disposition toward immigration was always one of welcoming. And it was always one of diversity. The issue was never that these people were coming in. It was the first waves. The first wave of Zionist immigration.
The Palestinian people originally were actually very welcoming of the Jews. They had no problem sharing the land with them, or even bringing them or allowing them to live on their land as well. The issue is that at some point, Zionist ideology permeated so deeply within, and their attitudes, the Jewish attitudes themselves, shifted of one from like gratitude from being a welcome to this land to actually, no, we actually want this land for ourselves. And when Destiny was actually talking about the people buying land up and Arabs selling the land. I think they only accounted for maybe like 10% of the land was actually sold to them. The rest of it was given to them by the British Mandate. So the British mandated actually is what gave them the vast majority of their land, 90% of it. Then on top of that, they were even took more land off on the back of the 1967 war. So it's quite a one-sided ordeal over here. But initially, the Palestinians, I mean, Jews and Christians and Muslims lived in the Middle East for centuries. No problems, right? When the Jews were not welcome there, they typically had no problems living in Muslim lands. Muslim lands, they actually were able to have businesses, have property, become royals, right? And they would become viziers of the kings themselves. So there'd be people who would give advice and share wisdom to the kings and so on and so forth. So they actually rose to like prominent positions in the Muslim lands. And it's not to say that there weren't like bad things that happened there. There's bad things that happen to all kinds of people, like everywhere, right? It was never perfect, but it was a much more fair and balanced way of living in their lands than it was in the West. Even to the point where Spanish Inquisition, during the Spanish Inquisition, the Jews themselves actually were begging the Muslims to take them with them when they were going to leave, because the Spanish Inquisition was also going to persecute Jewish people in Spain themselves as well. So it's very, it was never really like a Jewish versus this versus that type of perspective. It never was that. It was just about what they felt was just for them in terms of the land and the people.
Immigration, in 1882.
1880s, yeah.
Yeah, that wave, which again wasn't as successful for a particular reason, was not nearly regarded in the same way as the kind of post-World War I second Aliyah of 1914, right? 1914, because now you have the Jewish National Fund. Now you have a kind of concerted effort to organize not just a wave of people coming in, but as you point out, co-opting of land, of employment resources, etc. And so it wasn't that people were just coming, is that they were coming, as you pointed out, and kicking other people off. But it wasn't just that they got outmaneuvered. It was, or that they were just these, it was that the British government or the British colony, effectively, was creating the conditions, what they called empire on the cheap, right? We're going to be an imperial power, but we're going to have this new yishuv, this new kind of pre-48 Israeli government, Israeli state, be the stewards of this place, right?
Yeah, and I think it's challenging because, like, arguably all of the other states kind of took shape in the same way, right? Like all of these places, Syria, Iraq, Jordan.
But who did they expel? But who did they expel? That's the question.
I mean, they might not necessarily expel anybody, but the country lines and everything were drawn by by the British, and then these countries existed at the behest of the British. Britain, unfortunately, overpromised land via the Balfour Declaration and after the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire to Arab Palestinians and to incoming Jewish people. And I guess they realized, especially with the Peel Commission, that became unworkable. But I don't know if I can necessarily fault Jewish people up to that point for legally purchasing land and then moving down there under the auspice of British protection.
The issue isn't the purchasing of land, although the issue is but the project, the political Zionist project, wasn't one of just purchasing land and moving somewhere. It was the creation of a state that could only exist through the expulsion of other people. You can't have a Jewish state with a demographic majority of non-Jews. And so at the moment that they said this is going to be a Jewish state, and the project began of transfer. A Jewish state only exists with transfer. That's just a demographic reality. And so the issue isn't the acquisition of land. It's what does it mean to acquire land and kick other people off of it. And so by the time we get to 48, and by the way, all of these skirmishes, not all of them, but I would say most of these skirmishes, when you mention these reports, Simpson report, the Peel Commission report, all these reports are basically saying the same thing. The issue here isn't religious conflict. The issue here isn't xenophobia. The issue here is that the Arabs are being dispossessed, and they're pissed about it. And so.
And I agree, by some points, like, it had become unworkable, and both ends had essentially felt like they'd gotten by the British. From 36 to 39, the Arab revolts in Palestine were brutally crushed by the British, and then from 40 onwards, the Haganah and the Irgun were committing attacks against the British because the British had then started to severely limit Jewish immigration, and I think the Brits severely overpromised and kind of fucked this area up, given what they were trying to do with it, which to this day remains impossible. It's getting two people with hugely contrary interests trying to share the region. I don't know 100%. I don't, like, for instance, for 48, for for 48, 58, the Suez Crisis was 58 or 56. And then for 67, 56. And then for 67, I don't think I fault the Arab states for fighting those wars. Even for Yom Kippur afterwards, I don't think I fault them for fighting those wars, for feeling they had some kind of moral authority to expel the European Israelis from those territories. I think I can agree that they have a right to fight there. I think I can also be sympathetic towards Israel, not to invoke the Holocaust memes or everything, but like, man, the conditions around the world basically made it perfect for Israel to set up the state too. They did get that Balfour Declaration in 1917 from Britain that promised them some piece of land there. They did try to play nice, although to be fair, it was after.
No, they did.
Well, when they agreed, they did agree to the partition plan. They did agree to it.
Which, you mean the Peel permission?
The one that came after, I think, where they tried to partition the land where it would have been 55% Jews and 45% Arabs. Yeah, the UN 47, yeah. But I mean, but for reasonable reasons, I can understand why. Yeah, I can understand why Palestinians wouldn't have liked that. But like, there's also a history. There's a history of like Israel had no recognition from the surrounding Arab states in 48 for its borders. But after she won after she won in 67, all of a sudden we was like, well, hold on, maybe we do actually like these 47, 48 borders. And then after she continues to win wars, there's like more recognition after Israel has asserted itself basically in a militarily dominant fashion. And I think that's kind of how, and the Arabs did it too, right? Where people seem to only respect the strength of the other side. Israel gained territory through the acquisition of war, like the Six-Day War. Yeah. And Israel only got peace, and Egypt was only able to sue for peace after after doing well in the first few days of the Yom Kippur War, right? It was only after the Arabs had, redeemed themselves in their eyes that they felt like, okay, well, you know what, we can fuck you guys up if we want to. Now let's do some land for peace. But even that talk with Sadat was a secret one, and even Egypt was expelled from the Arab League for 10 years afterwards for that bilateral peace agreement because the rest of the Arab states were so upset about it.
It seems like your position is undergirded by the belief that violence and war and these things are going to at least happen. Now, I'm not saying you approve of them, but that they're sort of inevitable parts of.
I think that I feel like the history of Israel-Palestine, and I think on a microcosm, unfortunately, see repeat with the Palestinians and the Israelis, is that both sides are willing to cycle through periods of violence because they think that it's going to benefit them, but historically it just has happened to benefit Israel. I think that's been the issue, and now we're seeing it repeat with the and after time, the Arab states are like, okay, well, the war sucks. We just want to trade now because this is like a waste of all of our time, and the U.S. gives us a lot of money if we make peace with you. In the case of Egypt and Jordan, now the Palestinians, I think, are locked in the same cycle because they've been abandoned by everybody. All the bilateral treaties have fucked the Palestinians over. They don't have any allies now except for the Houthis.
The issue with the Palestinians themselves isn't just the Palestinian people and the elite or the ruling party of the country itself have different goals in mind when it comes to the creation of the Palestinian state. So realistically, it's just the Palestinians themselves never really had the proper representation to get Palestinian state done as they think they deserve. That's realistically the main issue there.
In Iran, and they're locked in that same cycle of violence. Well, we're going to keep fighting. I don't want a two-state solution where I have 80% of the West Bank and there's like an Israeli road and military base between every single house we have. It's ridiculous. And then the Israelis are like, okay, well, I'm not going to make peace with you. I tried to do it 10 times in the past, and you shot down every single one, and you kept doing violence, whether it was the second Intifada or any of the Hamas attacks afterwards to get your peace. Both sides are like locked on these train tracks where it just feels like they just want to keep fighting, and it just seems really hard to break them out. I'll ask you, because I know you got to go. By the way, the next person you're talking to is my political arch nemesis, Hassan, which is very funny. Don't tell him you came from here. I'm just curious on your opinion. You can respond to what I just said, and then what do you think is like the most realistic path forward? Like, can Hamas be negotiated with? What is the leadership that the Palestinians should look for? What do you think is like the best way that we encourage both sides to move in a direction where we stop having these fights all the time? Yeah,
I think it's a great question. I think nothing that we've done works. We have to start there, right?
Yeah.
I think that the two-state solution. Let me just back up one more thing. One thing I also said is, again, just in response to what you just said, is again, the idea that both sides are doing these things frames this in a language of equivalency that I don't accept as a beginning. There's a power dynamic here, and there's also a moral authority here that I think Israel does not have, which sort of takes us full circle to where we began.
Sure. I think I would agree to some extent. Israel acts like the Yishuv in 46, and like they still have an existential threat on all sides, and they probably need to not act like that anymore. So I can agree with you a bit there, yeah.
Right, and for me, because the Yishuv is nurtured and formed before Hitler ever rises to power, I view the entire project as not beginning out of the kind of urgency of the Holocaust, but because it wasn't, but out of a legitimate desire to have one's own self-determined nation and land, because of the permanence of anti-Semitism, the perennial vulnerability that all Jews feel around the world because of Jew hate around the world. It's a legitimate thing, right? And so I understand the desire for a state. What I don't understand, even against the backdrop of pogroms in Ukraine and Poland, Russia, whatever, is creating a state on the backs of or at the expense of the Palestinian people. And so I think any solution has to begin not from a place of these are two people who are warring over land, but rather there's a group of people who have been dispossessed of their land by a group of people who who themselves have their own legitimate concerns and legitimate needs. So if we begin from that place, that the Palestinian people have been dispossessed, then the question becomes, what does restoration look like? Netanyahu has said many times that we have to kind of respond to the facts on the ground, the realities that we're facing. I cannot imagine a situation, realistically, where Israel withdraws, where Israel gives land back. I don't see it. The West Bank is the longest military occupation in modern history. I don't see them suddenly tomorrow saying, you know what, here you go. And I've heard all the stories about, 2000 Clinton Accords, yada, yada. They were willing to do it. They were not, right? I mean, when we scratch underneath the surface, what we saw was Baluchistan's divided land. What you just talked about, big, I don't know if you've been over there, but I spent much time over there. And, it's even the prescribed state post Oslo is something wildly different than what anyone would want in real life. So in light of that, in light of the fact that I don't see Israel giving land back, and I don't see a legitimate two-state solution happening, nor do I see the desire or will for it. And Netanyahu has said as much, and now everyone again is using October 7th as a pretext to say, well, we really wanted that two-state solution, but yeah, you fucked it up now. Yeah, we can't do it now. In light of that, which I think could actually be a helpful confession, even if it's disingenuous in terms of its reasoning, I only can see a one-state solution as a viable outcome. Do I think that is a perfect solution? No. Do I think that's a morally just solution? No, because ultimately I've broken into your house and worn you down to the fact that you're willing to split it with me.
Can I ask just too quick on that? Because the more
the only reason like the one state solution can work so well is just because of the Zionist mentality that they created when they wanted to create the Israeli state, which had nothing to do with the Holocaust because this was happening pre-1900 anyways. The idea is that if you have a state, which is an ethno-state, living next to a state that is smaller than it, with the same attitudes that they have currently against those people, there's always going to be some sort of problems or whatever. And that's part of the reason why Israel is not really looking for a peaceful solution. They're occupying Palestine as they are right now. So realistically, the only thing is that both countries have to shift enough to want peace enough, or they have to coexist together. Same rules, same laws, same everything. And it can't be an ethno state. And we have to be one nation for both countries, for both citizens of the countries as well.
The more that I look at the maps, the more that I look at the territory and everything, a one-state solution would be so nice if it could work. But on the two issues is, what do you do about the Palestinian refugee problem? Because we don't have to get into what a Palestinian refugee is, but like there's 6 or 7 million of them now. If there is a one state, the Palestinians are going to want that right of return. And then what possible security guarantee do you give a Jewish citizen, an Israeli citizen, that one state isn't going to lead to, a third or fourth or fifth intifada or all sorts of domestic terrorism against their people? Like, why would they ever be compelled to accept that, I guess? And then you can take off after. I know I've kept you for a while.
No, it's a great question. I mean, and I don't want to slip into your war is hard kind of posture, although but like there's a way that you have to say, like, people don't get to get other people's land or get backup country simply because they feel unsafe, even if the unsafety is warranted. Right? So because the question presumes a certain kind of heightened duty that we have because of this fear. I think there are two things we need to think very strongly about. We have to figure out how to create a solution that keeps Jews and Palestinians, Jews and Arabs, however you want to describe them. But I'm going to say Palestinians, I'm speaking about the nation right now.
Yeah, sure, that's fair.
But also I'm thinking about, I want to be clear because I don't want people to think I'm using Arab in the way that the Israeli state uses Arab to deny the Palestinians. I'm saying Palestinians and also the other surrounding Arab nations.
We're talking Israelis and Palestinians, so the people that would live in whatever greater state. Yeah.
Inside of this one state, whether it's a single secular democratic state or whether it's a binational state, there's multiple ways this could look. But I think there's two things we have to think about. One is the kind of historical fear of Jews being persecuted in other countries and not having a place to go. And I think that I think that we could use our political imaginations a little more creatively and say, there's a difference between saying we have a state that anybody can come at all times and saying that we can have a state that is for Jews and Palestinians, but at the same time have a special status for people who are fleeing for particular reasons, right? We can have a policy of welcoming refugees. I mean, in theory, that's what the Refugee Act of 1950 whatever is supposed to do. But in theory, I'm saying I would be fine with a nation state if it were up to me, and it's not up to me. But if it were up to me, I'd be fine with any country saying, look, persecuted Jews around the world have a right to come here. which addresses the outside issue. Your question, though, I understand, was about the internal fear.
Uh-huh.
I would argue that the fear of intifadas are always acts of resistance. The idea that, again, going back to the Taft Commission, the Peel Commission, the Simpson Report, all this stuff, all the white papers from the British, all the historical moments, the resistance Palestinians offer is in response to their dispossession, not because of Jew hate. So if we begin from a place of saying people have justice, then there will be peace. And that might sound like a lefty cliche, but I think it's true. I think if Palestinians have a contiguous, healthy, democratic state, I don't think you see acts of violence. I don't think you see the kind of danger that you're talking about. If they have access to safety, dignity, self-determination, freedom, etc., I think you'll see exactly what you need to see.
Okay. All right. I could argue with you more on that, but listen, I super appreciate the conversation. If you're ever bored or ever want to chat again in the future for any of this, I super appreciate the talk. Is there like...
Yeah, and I mean, kind of just piggyback off of what he just said right there. That's exactly why after October 7th, after the war had begun, there was an increase for support for Hamas, mainly just because the people felt it was just unjustified that they were being attacked or killed. But actually, before that, the popularity of Hamas was not relatively high and only climbed higher after October 7th. So we just focus on the fact that justice and then peace, and what's fair is fair, and we work from there. A lot of the situations there will actually resolve themselves. There has to be a willingness, right? And there has to be a willingness. There should be a ceasefire, and they should be working on these things to for the greater peace for both people. But as far as I see right now and what's going on in Gaza, it's a very, very dire situation, especially what's going to happen in Rafah. So I'm going to be covering the Rafah stuff, I think, tomorrow. It's Valentine's Day, so I'm going to go and hang out with my girl for a little bit. She's mad at me. I'll catch everyone later, hopefully tomorrow, cover up more stuff. So everyone have a good day and happy Valentine's Day. Take care.